So this is when, we get word, from her father. The farmer shows up and he has the branch and he's like, your father took ill on the road. Another case of Victorian novel
Very novel disease.
disease.
Man,
It's
it's
a
really going
plague. It's a
around.
pandemic. Yeah. Welcome back to Not My Fantasy, the show where we talk about fantasy films and the lore that inspired them. I'm Cullen.
And I'm Hannah.
And today we have a returning guest,
Yay.
one half of the fairy tellers, Katrina. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back on.
Of
We're
course.
I've been waiting for the day. Like, when's the perfect time? And I was like, well, Cinderella series,
Yes.
perfect time. Yeah.
I love a good Cinderella series.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't? You guys on the fairy tellers, you do Cinderella basically every year.
Yeah, our anniversary episode, because it was one of our like introductory episodes. Like we did an introductory episode and then Cinderella like went right into like Cinderella. And basically every anniversary of the podcast, we're like, all right, time to pull out another Cinderella episode because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, we've we are in the I guess towards the end, the climax of our Cinderella series.
Mhm.
We've done the animated classic, we've done the Rodgers and Hammerstein with Brandy, we've
Yes.
done Camila Cabello's movie with Cinderella.
It was a motion picture.
It was a moving picture with sound synchronized. Yeah. And uh now we're kind of movie not going chronologically. We're back in the 2015 Disney live action remake question mark of
Yeah,
Cinderella.
good question. I'd like to
Um
talk about it.
I'm in my prince costume for my birthday, which was Cinderella themed.
Wonderful. Truly inspired.
I got my pumpkin mug. I found a Cinderella Christmas ornament over the holidays because my mom was like, take your old ornaments. So in addition to, I can't remember if I'd had this use this one in our Disney Cinderella episode, the ornament.
Oh,
And then for the party for decoration, I got a glass slipper. So
nice.
yeah.
Excellent. I love when you reach the stage of adulthood where your parents like, get
I was
your
just gonna say it.
Christmas ornaments out of my house.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Every time I come home, I do try and be like, what's at least like, even if it's a short trip, like, is there a drawer or something to just like go through
Yeah.
and be like, whatever's left, you can get rid of, like.
Yeah.
And I was just at Disneyland the other day, so I have this Sleeping Beauty mug. I know it's a little off-brand for this episode, but it has like a little
Yeah.
twirly thing.
We'll allow it.
So I'm drinking
I
wine out of
spoke for
this.
you. I spoke for you too, Hannah. I was like, we'll allow it.
Well, I was gonna say, actually, sorry, on this side,
Mhm.
this is how directions work.
Yeah.
On this side, I actually thought her dress actually looked a little bit Sleeping Beauty-ish, so I do think it's still
Yeah.
there.
Especially
Yeah.
with her hair down.
Yes.
Yeah. Not to mention the pink to blue when she was like,
Mhm.
I will get into it, but it's like when she was like, oh no, I want to keep my mother's dress on, and then the lady's like, as the fairy godmother, the lady,
The lady.
The
Just
lady.
the
A random
lady.
woman.
the lady, her fairy godmother was like, oh yeah, but as long as I can change every single thing about it, which I was
I
like,
got thoughts.
Yeah.
yeah, I
That,
was like,
that moment, I'm like, why add that line if you're just gonna make a brand new dress?
yeah,
Yeah.
but that pink to blue very
Mhm.
much reminded me of Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
Just like the fairy godmothers in the Disney version that were like back and
Mhm.
forth.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Disneyland, they have her in the parade and it changes. She has like a dress where the fabric is designed to like sometimes it looks pink, sometimes it looks blue. It's
Well,
very
that's
pretty.
fun.
Yeah, very pretty pattern. So all right, yeah, we're talking about 2015 Cinderella. I've seen this movie many times. I saw it in theaters with my ex. Shout out to her. She's doing great. As far as I know, she's doing great, and I'm happy about it. I've seen it a million times since. This is actually like an early date with my now husband. We watched this movie. I own it on
Famous
DVD.
fantasy lover, Rafa.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he does not. He tolerated it. I have this on DVD and Blu-ray. I have like the art book, which I actually referenced for this episode because I have a lot of like interviews with the actors and the writers and stuff. It's called, yeah, they also have stuff about the animated one, but I've seen this. I usually watch this around Easter. I feel like it's an oddly Christian movie, so I'll watch it. I'll watch it for Easter. It's like this or Prince of Egypt. Like I'm not popping in the Passion, so
I was just
uh
gonna say, yes,
Yeah.
this and The Passion of the Christ,
yeah.
clearly the two Easter coded films.
Yes. And
Because
yeah, it's
yeah, it definitely has like a spring vibe
yeah, with the
about it.
colors and it's like it's a comfort movie. It's something I go to when I
Yeah.
feel bad. And it's only an hour and 45 minutes. I just want to point out the Beauty and the Beast remake is 2 hours and 19 minutes.
And I have some interesting thoughts about the structure and
Yeah.
how I was shocked at actually how long it was and all of the stuff they fit in there in that time. I have only seen this movie one other time.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is I saw it pretty soon after it came out, and I did not like it when I first saw it.
I
And
remember
granted,
that. Yeah.
I wasn't super paying attention to it. And because I was either doing scrapbooking or decorating my graduation cap. I can't remember which, but I remember being in my friend Amanda's house and she had it on the background. I was kind of watching it and I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. Um, and then now I've watched it for a second time. So yeah.
Nice. This last night was the first time I have ever seen this movie. And I remember when it came out, and the biggest thing about it was I was like, oh, it has some people from Downton Abbey in it. And like
Yeah.
that's where my brain was at. And all of this stuff that I watched about like the making of the dress, like for whatever
Yes.
reason, that was what was like being played and talked about and like in the zeitgeist or whatever, was just like look at the costume designs for this movie. But at the time, the remakes, they hadn't made as many remakes as like as we all know that there
Now.
are now. And so to me, I was kind of like, I thought it was kind of like a one-off like remake kind of like a thing, and so I wasn't that interested in going and seeing it, and then I just never did. But I'm glad I watched it last night. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was
It
gonna ask, what's your general thought on Disney live action remakes?
I feel I watching the one last night, like watching Cinderella last night, I was like, I wish all of them had this much care and
Yep.
thought put into them. Not that I agree with every creative choice that they made in this movie. There were
Yeah.
some things that I was like, okay, that's a choice.
Yeah.
But like I felt like they tried to make it different enough that it was new, but still this like still had so many nods to like the old one that it felt very similar. So for me, like the new live actions are very like hit or miss of
Yeah.
whether I'm like, okay, you put the right type of care into like the plot, the storyline, making it fresh. Yeah, I'm like, it's been hit or miss.
Yeah, we're generally not super sometimes when they stray is usually when I enjoy it more. Like I thought in The Little Mermaid, like we liked Eric and Ariel's like relationship, like we thought they were very cute, but then everything left over from the animated movie felt like it was left over from a different movie. And
Yeah.
it's like because the animate what works in animation doesn't always work in live action.
Yeah.
And so I think this movie was very wise. They say it in the book that I have about that they chose to base it off the Perrault fairy tale with nods to Disney, and that was like an intentional choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a very Kenneth Branagh thing to do, I think. He was like, I'm only doing it if the movie's gonna be like this. But I also think I like what you said that they put care into it, because I feel like some of the other live action remakes, Beauty and the Beast, it felt like they did not really care about that movie,
Yeah.
like the one they were basing it on or the one they were making. And this one felt like it cared about the material, it cares about the Cinderella story.
Yeah.
And I you can definitely feel that in this movie. So
Yeah.
This was one of the first live actions. It was commissioned after the success of that Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland. They're
mhm.
like, let's do this. And so Aline Brosh McKenna was brought on, and she made like a swashbuckling knight Cinderella. And they were like, that's a little too far. And then there was another one that was darker, and they're like, that's a little too dark. And they're saying they wanted to make a definitive live action version. Like they said, spend as much money as you want, as long as it's one for the time capsule, like one that people will remember.
Mm.
So they landed on writer Chris Weitz, who wrote About a Boy and Rogue One, and director of New Moon in Twilight. So a movie we will revisit again. Directed by Kenneth Branagh. So he's actor, performer, big Shakespeare guy.
Yeah.
Which you see in this.
Mhm.
He also directed Belfast, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Shout out to Lisa Frankenstein. Music by Patrick Doyle, costume design by Sandy Powell. She got an Oscar nomination for the costume design. I'm wearing like a corset thing under this costume, so in honor solidarity with
wow.
Lily James.
Look at
Yeah,
you.
Oh, yeah.
Something that I kind of wanted to bring up, and I'm bringing up now because I'm pretty sure, I'm going to say allegedly because I don't know all of the truth to this, that Kenneth Branagh was in a relationship with Emma Thompson, and
yes,
Helena Bonham Carter
yeah.
and Kenneth Branagh had an affair, I guess.
The book described it
Alleged,
as friends for a long time.
and that's great. And so I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so interesting that like they still like work together. And
Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
that was I just kept thinking about that every time I heard Helena Bonham Carter's voice. When I saw her, I was like, that's so interesting. What is that dynamic like?
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's one of those interesting like Hollywood things and like British Hollywood. But you know what I mean,
Yeah.
where like because like the British actors that have kind of like made it big in Hollywood. That's what
Mhm.
yeah,
there is this like such a weird conversation about that, like friends for a long time, because it was like they were such good friends with each other for a very long time that it affected Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson's marriage,
Mhm.
giving me the
which
one scene I like in Love Actually.
yeah, and yes. And it's so interesting because all of them end up having to like work with each other at like
Oh yeah.
different points and on different projects, and every time they have to make like a very politically correct statement about each other, like a very like not politically correct but PR statement, where they're
Mhm.
just like, oh, they're very good at their craft, and that's like it. Emma Thompson's just like, oh yes, they're very good at their craft.
Yep.
And Helena Bonham Carter's like, oh yes, anytime I have an opportunity to work with talent, I take it. And it's like, you guys aren't saying like,
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
just a little thing that colored my experience of this movie.
what's funny is my first experience with Kenneth Branagh is like exclusively Shakespearean, where it's
Interesting.
like Hamlet, and I think he was Iago in Othello that had Lawrence Fishburne in it. Was that the
That
one? I
sounds
don't know.
right.
I think so. Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I like knew him from, and then anytime he pops up in anything else, I'm like, wait, is that Hamlet? Like,
I saw him do A Winter's Tale, like one of those like Fathom events where they like
Oh
play
yeah.
that AMC. Yeah, so he does, you can, I feel like you see that in the way that everyone acts, in that this story, I feel like this version of this story, they were less like, let's reinvent the story, and more like, let's explore why the people in this story behave the way that they do.
yeah.
Yes.
And which was interesting, and I think is what makes, I think that's the strongest aspect of this movie, even though yes, there are some choices where I'm like, okay. Emma Watson said no, which I
Fascinating.
always think of the publicity. The Oprah Winfrey said no, Macklemore said no. Um, it stars Lily
That's
James
fascinating.
in kind of her breakout role after she was working. She was in Downton Abbey, but
Yeah.
after this, she's in Baby Driver, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, Pride and Prejudice
Pride and
and
Prejudice and Zombies.
Zombies,
Yeah.
Rebecca, Iron Claw, Yesterday. She's in TV like War and Peace and Pam and Tommy. She's Pamela Anderson. She does Romeo and Juliet with Richard
Richard
Madden,
Madden. Mhm.
who he was famous for Game of Thrones, but after this he would do Rocket Man and The Bodyguard.
Mhm.
So it kind of caught them right as they were
Yeah.
popping up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really interesting because like watching Downton Abbey, she played kind of like a smaller role because she was supposed to be another woman that was replacing kind of the audience's heart after
Hmm.
losing one character. They're kind of
Oh,
like
Sybil.
yeah,
Spoilers for
yes.
Downton Abbey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sybil. Um the death in a show that traumatized my husband the most.
Honestly, yeah.
he, it was funny. It's like spoilers for Downton Abbey, but yeah, he's like, I'm so glad that women don't die in childbirth like that anymore. And I was like, what are you talking about? That definitely happens. And then it happened to me. Not, I didn't die in
I was
childbirth,
like,
but I,
whoa.
but I like got preeclampsia and had to be like hospitalized, emergency C-section to get the like the baby out or whatever. But my husband was permanently traumatized from like that scene in Downton Abbey. And but anyway, she kind of replaced that female like role of like, oh, we needed another sister for drama.
Yeah.
She wasn't a sister, she was like a cousin that like came in. And I thought, wow, like she's really good. Like it'd be interesting to see her in like more stuff. And then she got cast
Mhm.
in this, and it was like, oh wow, good for her. And then you mentioned like the corset, the dress, that was kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah, the conversation was like, how thin are they going to make this woman to make this dress look big?
Yeah, I think she was
Yeah.
like in the dress, she could only like drink liquids or something. Yeah. But this also stars podcast alum Kate Blanchett as Lady
Mhm.
Tremaine from Lord of the Rings, Blue Jasmine, Carol, Tar, Elizabeth. Basically every movie that's ever made has Kate Blanchett.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
She's famous for playing Spezzatura the monkey in Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
Fascinating.
Yeah, just want to point that out there. Uh,
It's wild.
Is she Lady Galadriel in Lord
yes.
of the
Yeah.
Rings? Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So she is
She's
Lady Galadriel because she hasn't aged since
yeah.
Yeah.
2001. Yeah.
It's wild. Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
Helena Bonham Carter, yes, is in this as the fairy godmother. We have Derek Jacobi as the king, Sophie McShira and Holiday Granger as Anastasia and Drizella, Nonso Anozi as the captain, and Stellan Skarsgård as the Grand Duke. This was the look they said was supposed to be vaguely mid 19th century, very also vaguely Austria-Hungarian Empire.
Mm.
Which it's not like I saw that and was like, Austro-Hungarian Empire, here we go.
Nailed it.
But they said that and I was like, I see it. I see
yeah,
it.
you can see it. Yeah. Because I was like, oh, it's like there's like some French, and they reference like the language of French as if like they're not speaking English just for the audience sake and everyone else speaks French. It's like, no, French is a foreign language here. And I was like, oh, I just assumed this was France. And then now that you said it, I was like, oh, Austria-Hungary, that's nearby.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I felt like there was a lot more Grimm in
Yeah.
what they were doing. And so like I felt like it was like them using that French and like referencing that French as like a foreign country was kind of like a nod back to like Charles Perrault, where it was like, oh, but we all know like the
Yeah.
history of this tale, French.
Yeah.
And yeah, but that I could have been just reading too much into
No, I think it was like it was a nod. Because definitely you can tell they did their research for this one. And the costumes, also had a 40s and 50s flair that was supposed to be
Mhm.
like the homage to Disney. So it did not win the Oscar for costumes, but even worse, Lily James didn't win a Teen Choice Award that she was nominated for, which
Wow.
really disappointed everyone.
Robbed. Who won? Who won? What category was
It
she in
was
it for?
We
Best
don't need to
New
know.
Actress in the Sci-Fi or Fantasy.
Okay, who won?
I don't know. All
Yeah.
I know is the trauma, the loss.
Yeah,
Okay, I will.
if we don't know who it is, then we can confidently say she was robbed.
Yeah.
Because if we actually know who won, then we might, be swayed into being like, oh, I guess they did deserve it. But
Good
as long
job.
as we
Yeah.
don't know who it is, we just say
Would it have been
she was
2015 or
robbed.
2016? Do you know?
I think 2015. This came out in spring 2015. I remember because I had a virus.
Damn.
I threw up. I like woke up in my dorm room by where I lit, like I was an RA. I threw up, and then the ants that I had been dealing with ate the puke, and then I didn't have an ant problem anymore.
Wow.
But trying
Okay.
to like clean after you throw up in the middle of the night when you live in a shared bathroom, like a community bathroom situation,
Right.
horrible. So this movie, it was released March 13th, 2015, grossed 542 million worldwide on a $90 million budget, becoming Branagh's highest grossing film to date, even beating Thor. Received positive reviews. It was mostly people liked it. I feel like it kind of predicted a trend of like people wanting more straightforward fairy tales in an era of subversion. So kind of like we did Camilla, and I feel like Camilla went back like to what was trendy then, and it had fallen out of style. Yes, Hannah.
I have an update on the Teen Choice Awards of
Yes.
2015. Her competitors were Mackenzie Foy for Interstellar, Scarlett Johansson for Avengers Age of Ultron. And it's not new actor, it's just choice actress. Okay. Mila Kunis, Jupiter Ascending. Britt Robertson, Tomorrowland, and then the winner, Jennifer Lawrence, The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 1.
I mean,
So it was
Okay.
rigged from the beginning.
Yeah, because I'm
Yeah.
like teen choice awards. The Hunger
Yeah.
Games was like the series.
It was
like
the shit.
the
And it
young
deserved
adult
it. Yeah.
dystopia. Yeah.
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 So, oh wow, Jennifer Lawrence actually won 3 years in a row, 2014, 2015, and she won in 2012. But yeah, wow, Jennifer Lawrence really just like slayed this category for many years.
It's probably at the top of her LinkedIn.
As it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like this movie kind of predicted a trend, whereas Camila Cabello's Cinderella felt out of date when it came out. Like it was stuck in 2013. But that's kind of the background of the movie. So if we get into like our lore portion, Katrina mentioned this pulls a lot from the Grimms.
Yeah.
So as we've gone through, we've gone through the history of Cinderella, ATU type 510A. And we've talked about Finette Cindron and Cinderella in France. We went back to Yishen in China and Rhodopis in Egypt, Greece. And then we visited Basile last week with Cinderella Cat.
Yes.
Murder Cinderella.
Love her.
Yeah. And so we're gonna go to Germany. So I found in this book that I was reading for the movies that the oldest illustration of Cinderella is from 16th century Nuremberg. It's a woodcut. So she's been around, as we've talked about. People always talk about the original version of things, and they always just go for whatever is the most clickbait, dark, violent version. But the Brothers Grimm, that 1812 was a while after 1697.
It was a
Yeah.
minute or
It
so.
was a few minutes, yeah. So their version, came out much later. Aschenputtel is how it's called in German. Now, do you remember, Hannah, back in episode 1
Oh
in
boy.
Brothers Grimm, when that
Uh-huh.
guy gets swallowed by a tree and just screams Aschenputtel?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what this is. So Aschenputtel is just Cinderella in German.
So he was calling out for his goddess. What you're saying.
Yes, Cinderella. Yeah. So I actually read this in my Brothers Grimm collection as a kid, and it was called Ashenputtel, and I was like, wow, this is a lot like Cinderella. So it is. So I actually did the Brothers Grimm Cinderella for forensics in high school. It was like speech and debate, and then there was like so I did debate, and then there was the forensics portion. And I started by doing the Brothers Grimm story Clever Elsie, which is basically the story of once upon a time there's a girl who's really dumb, and then she just does dumb things and it ends. And I thought it was really funny. And they were like, we don't get it. Like, what's the moral? And I was like, there really isn't one. And they're
Yeah.
like, they're like, it should have a moral. So I did Cinderella. And I think the Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella is my favorite fairy tale. I did do my Cinderella musical off of this one. There's something about it,
Yeah.
it's combined several different tales, various Hessian stories. And according to Virginia Commonwealth University, it says that they pulled it from a woman in a nursing home in Marburg, but it's generally kind of like they compiled this from several different Cinderella variants. There's debate over like the French Protestant Huguenot influence, like the Hassenpflug sisters, where we got like their version of Sleeping Beauty from. Uh, so it's typical with Cinderella, it's so omnipresent that it's hard to trace.
Yeah.
But let's retell Brothers Grimm Cinderella, and I will be using voices this time
Oh,
because
yes.
I'll be from forensics.
Acting.
Yeah, I'll be acting. It's what Kenneth Branagh would want.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say,
It
Kenneth
is.
Branagh would be proud.
Absolutely.
Yeah, once upon a time, a rich man's wife becomes sick. She calls her daughter and is like, be good and pious, and God and I will always look after you. Then she dies.
Rip.
R.I.P. Yeah. Snow falls on the ground, lays a blanket on her grave. By the time the snow melts, dad has a new wife. So pretty quick. So enter this new woman with two daughters whose faces were beautiful, and in some translations, lily white, but whose hearts were vile and black. And they were like, ew, why should this silly goose sit in the parlor with us, out with his kitchen maid? So they dressed her in rags. They're like, if you want food, you have to work for it. So she has no bed. She has dirty clothes. She sleeps in the hearth, and they throw peas and lentils into the ashes and make her pick them out. And so that's why they call her Cinderella. Um, Meanwhile, as these dads often do, he's going on a business trip. Uh, yeah, and he's like, what do you want? And they're like, fine dresses, pearls and jewels. And he's like, and you, Cinderella? And she's like, only the twig that brushes your forehead on your way. He's like, okay, bitch. Which we had from the Basile version. I'm like, I think it still fits. I think this dad's attitude is always the same.
Yeah.
And he brought the stuff back, and she got her twig, she plants it on her mother's grave, and she comes every day to pray and cry, and her tears water it until the tree becomes a large, beautiful tree. And so, unlike Kelly Clarkson, she did not keep the tears behind her hazel eyes. They were coming out. Let the rain fall down. So a dove would land on the tree, and whenever
Isn't that I'm like, isn't that Hillary Duff?
that's Hillary Duff.
Yes.
I
Okay.
crossed her
Two
out.
Yeah.
pop icons in
Yeah,
one
I was-
sentence.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, that was
Unlock something in your brain.
Fall down and wash away. Yeah, it
Yeah.
did it.
Yep.
Also played Cinderella. Yeah.
Cinderella story. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. This
Waiting
is
for you is like waiting for rain in this drought. Useless and disappointing.
Oh
wow.
my
Oh my
gosh, I'm
gosh.
like
The layers.
the layers, so clever. I love it. Keep going. I'm
So-
riveted.
A dove lands in the tree, and whenever she expressed a wish, the dove would bring it to her. So this never explained. She could be rich. My theory is that she was only asking for Beanie Babies. She was doing
Oh.
like a long-term investment. She's like, these are going to be worth a lot of
Right.
money.
The original NFTs.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she had like a closet full of Beanie Babies.
And like rare ones. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, in like 20 years, these are gonna be like whoa, so much money.
She's like, I'm gonna go to college. She's saving
Yeah.
up. So meanwhile, the king proclaims a 3-day festival for all the beautiful women, no uggos. In the past it was all the royal women. It's like, no, you just got to be hot. And his son is gonna choose a bride. And the stepsisters are like, comb our hair, brush our shoes, and buckle our buckles. We're going to King Chella. Uh, and Cinderella cries because she wants to go to the festival of King Chella. But the stepmother is like, you're far too dusty and dirty to be seen, and you have no shoes. You can't go. I can't do German well, so she's French.
Perfect.
But Cinderella keeps crying, and she's like, please, 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 please. And she's like, fine. If you can pick out these lentils from the ashes, you can go. And she throws lentils everywhere. And the stepmother leaves. Cinderella throws open to the door, and she's like, ye tame doves and turtle doves, and all ye birds under heaven, come put the good ones in your pot and the bad ones in your crop. So all the doves and the pigeons and every bird under heaven
There's
comes into the
flamingos in that heart.
yeah. There's penguins. Yeah. It took them a long time to get there, but so they eat the bad ones, they sort the good ones. And so she's super happy. She's like, stepmother, now I can go to the festival. And she's like, shit, what about two balls? And now she's Bora. And Cinderella does
My bowl.
my
My bowl.
Cinderella basically does the same thing. And she's like, see? And the stepmother's like, we would be ashamed of you. No shoes, no dress, no festival. People would laugh at you. So they leave her, and Cinderella cries to the tree. She's like, little tree, shake and shiver, silver and gold all over me. Rain on Me, featuring Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande. That could have been in the jukebox musical version. So a radiant golden dress, shoes fall down to her. She goes to the festival. Everyone's like, wow. And the king's son dances with her. And whenever anyone else tries to ask her to dance, he's like, she is my partner. So she's like, I'm done, want to go home. And he's like, oh, let me walk you home. Because he wants to see where she lives. And she's like, oh no, he's gonna know I'm a broke servant girl. And she's like, look, a monkey. And she climbs into this birdhouse. And he's like, damn, where'd you go? And her dad walks by, and the prince is like, there's a girl in there. And the dad's like, could it be Cinderella? So he just cuts down the birdhouse, but she'd already snuck off. She had gone home, changed out of her clothes, she hid in the ashes. So when they came home, she's like, oh, it's just me, a servant girl, Uh, rinse and repeat for day 2, except this time she climbs into a pear tree that gets cut down. So next night, same thing. The prince is like, she's my partner. But it's, she runs off again, but he had a plan. He laid pitch on the stairs. So her feet stick and she loses a shoe. He's like, oh, this shoe's small, slender, gold. He's like, Dad, I'll only marry whoever fits this shoe. And so he goes off in search. Stepsisters are happy because they have pretty feet. They're like, this is our chance. So the king's son shows up, but it won't fit on the oldest one. And the stepmother is like, cut off your heel when you're queen, you'll never have to walk. So she cuts off her heel. She swallows the pain, goes out to the prince. He puts her on the horse, and this is where I would do the Monty Python. Yeah. But the birds are like rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo. There's blood in this shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride isn't right. And he's like, damn girl, you're crazy, and takes her back because she's got blood in her shoe.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat, younger stepsister. And the bird's singing again, takes her back, and he's like, do you have any other daughters? And the dad, this girl's father, is like, only a honey little Cinderella left over from my first wife, but she cannot possibly be the bride. And the prince is like, why don't you just bring her here? And the stepmother is like, she's far too dusty and how you say dirty to be seen.
Well, you're really getting into character. You forgot how to say in English a word.
Yeah.
Wow, you're going method.
Going method. And he's like, I don't care, bring her here. So Cinderella here, she's summoned. She has a girl wash your face moment. She washes up, presents herself, she sits down, shoe fits perfectly, and then he looks up and is like, "Oh, it's you. This is my true bride." Uh, so the birds are like, rook de goo, no blood in the shoe. The shoe's not too tight. This bride is right. And that's in forensics, that's where I just ended it. But the story goes on, got another paragraph. The birds alight on her shoulders, and at the wedding, the stepsisters are trying to get in good with her. So they walk into the church on either side. But as Here Comes the Bride is playing, these doves, these pigeons, peck out their eyes. And then they're still going to try again, and they walk out on different sides with their good eyes closer for the pigeons to then uh, peck out. And they're punished for their wickedness and falsehood with blindness. That's how it ends.
Yeah, no wonder that you decided to leave out that paragraph for your Uber Christian homeschool program.
Yeah. Yeah. Say, take away my points, Christian communicators of Ohio and Michigan.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that's wild. Yeah, hearing all of that, like I did know this story, but then it just brings me back to Into the Woods
Yes.
Yeah.
because of like the goo on the stairs and stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
and I guess I kind of like didn't realize how close a lot of those elements are to this story. So, but we'll talk about Into the Woods another time.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what
Wow.
immediately my brain, I was like remembering all these good like Into the Woods moments where I was like, oh man, they really went to like the Grimms for like their source material, which I love because it for their audience, yeah, it presents like a story most people are like less familiar with, which makes it
Yeah.
more interesting. But we're not talking about that right now.
No. Tune in another time for that. So this kind of, our question we keep asking is, what is Cinderella about? It's this,
Yeah.
she's the it girl, she's everywhere. What is it about? And so, especially when we talk about Basile with like Murder Cinderella, because
Yeah.
usually it's like this is very much a virtue rewarded. I do like that there's no insane moral at the end, Perot. So
Yeah.
just when you think of Perot moral, it's like, how did you get this from the story? Then you get a
Yeah.
Basile moral, and you're like, you made this up now. Like,
Yeah, no, especially because it's usually like because inside of like the Pentamerone or whatever, you've got these old ladies who are like trying to tie it into the greater like frame story. And so you're like,
yeah.
lady, what are you talking about?
Oh, it's like Farty Patricia. They
Yeah,
like
like
had all these
yes,
names.
like farty Patricia, what are you getting at? And she's like, oh, you know, sometimes when someone's mean to you, you got to chop their head off. And you're like, is that what you're trying to say? And she's
Party Patricia.
like, what?
Silly goose.
Yeah.
There's like syphilitic Cinda, and it's like who? What is going on in this story?
He is
Oh.
no one else names their characters. He's like, no, everybody's getting a name.
Yeah, everybody's getting a name and a little descriptor so you remember them better.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I do.
Wish I could forget syphilitic Cinda.
It's like,
Oh,
oh my God.
iconic.
I wasn't even joking.
Yeah, no, they think those are legit all their names. Yeah. Yeah, this kind of the Brothers Grimm, it reflects the German Protestant values as opposed to, Perrault's like royal aristocratic, like French Catholic. So it's like more piety and hard work over graciousness and forgiveness. The prince is a little more active. He gets her himself. The women are invited for their beauty, not their status. And Cinderella, though, has she's a lot more active. She has a lot more agency, just like oddly though, they don't really tell you what she's thinking or why she does what she does.
Yeah.
But she's doing stuff. You're like, I don't know what you're up to, but
but you are active.
Yeah.
You're up to something.
You are a participant in this story.
Yeah, which is why I always say, because people be like, oh, Cinderella doesn't have much of a personality. I'm always like, by fairy tale character standards, like most Cinderellas are better defined, you know, when you compare to like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty or Rapunzel. Like
Yeah.
Cinderella's story is hinged on character traits. You know, they can be
Yeah.
kind, good, you know, like these very general, but like we kind of take the Disney personality and put it on top of Snow White, but Snow White really doesn't have like they
Yeah.
don't she's not particularly anything, you know.
Yeah.
It's just I, you know, and that's fine, you know, like anything about Sleeping Beauty and Perrault, you can kind of maybe glean some things. There's not really anything in the Brothers Grimm. You know, there's just Cinderella has just a little bit more, and I think that's what makes her
Yeah.
the it girl is there's a thing to work with. Uh
Yeah.
yeah, this movie definitely pulls from they did their research. They did some Googling.
Yeah. Which
Uh,
I just want to say right at the beginning of the movie when they have like birds flying in, there's part of my brain that was like, oh, I wonder if this movie is gonna go Grimm's Brothers direction and we're gonna get some eye plucking, but no
no.
threat of no threat of that type of violence in this film.
I always wonder if Cinderella was like cool with the birds doing it. If she was like, yeah, she's like, I'm not gonna say anything, but okay. Or if she was like,
Yeah.
or she was like, no, don't. Or if she was like, no,
Don't.
don't.
Oh no, that happened? That
Oh.
sucks. You can't see anymore? Maybe you shouldn't have been a bitch to me.
Yeah. Like
You,
sometimes what is the thing where it's like, I'm not saying they deserved it, but God's timing is always right. And it's like
that is what she would say. This German, like, pious Cinderella. Not saying they deserve. Yeah.
God's timing is always right.
Yeah. That's but it is, you know, we talked about in the Perot one when they just get forgiven, it does feel kind of like, well, they didn't learn anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's like, okay, I guess she's like a better person than me.
Right.
Being like, oh, I'll forgive them, but it doesn't sit right.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Do we want to jump into the movie?
Let's do it. This movie that also is not a musical.
Yeah.
There's no singing. There's a little
This
bit at the end, but
Yeah.
this is our first non-musical Cinderella. I
Wow.
realize.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just realized right now when you said that I was like,
Uh-huh.
this wasn't a musical.
Yeah, actually, when I started it, I was like, if I'm remembering correctly, this isn't a musical because otherwise I would have remembered Richard Madden singing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he doesn't. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Or even
Yeah.
Lily James.
Yeah.
'Cause I didn't remember her little
Yeah.
ditty at the end.
Yeah, because it's like there's just really that one song that's just, yeah, that song that her mom sings to her that then
Mhm.
comes back at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have her sing Dream is the Wish Your Heart Makes and Helena Bonham Carter sing Bippity Boppity Boo for the credits.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, and they're actually very well mixed. Like, I don't you know, I'm not an Emma Watson hater. I do just want to come out and say I'm not an Emma Watson hater, but the Lily James does sound better in the track.
Mm.
I'm gonna say it. Now, I feel like A Dream is Wish Your Heart Makes a like probably easier song to sing than some of Belle's stuff. Maybe. I'm not
Potentially.
yeah, you know, and I'm not even I think if other things were working in that movie, I wouldn't notice her auto-tuning as much.
But I mean, one of these people went on to be the younger version of Meryl Streep in Mamma Mia 2. And
True.
the other, I don't think has ever been in a musical since
Which good for her.
Beauty and the
Don't
Beast.
do it. Don't do
Yeah,
it.
she's like, I know my strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love Perks of Being a Wallflower, okay? I'm not an Emma Watson hater. So this movie actually it opens with they do like a version of the Cinderella castle at Disney World.
Mm-hmm.
So which I was gonna say, you know, if the Fairy Tellers is starting a series on Pourquoi tales of why stories about why things are the way they are, this could
Yeah.
be a Pourquoi tale of who lives in the castle at the center of Magic Kingdom in Disney
Yeah.
World.
There you go.
Yeah.
Like, whose castle is this?
Yeah.
And why?
Uh so it opens with birds and clouds. We have another fairy godmother as narrator. Like really the Camilla version, there's so much of it that they're just lifting from this movie.
Yeah.
That's why I say I feel like that movie is an adaptation of this one more than of Perot.
Interesting.
Yeah. Uh, but she talks about, she saw that she's a baby, but she already's got opinions. She can see the world, not as it was, but as it could be. And we kind of see her childhood. We see her house where they lived for many generations. We see her friends, Mr. Goose. We see the mice
Who don't talk
who
and who
don't
don't
talk.
transform into James Corden.
Yeah.
Two
Very
winning.
important point.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they
Two
talk
big wins.
they talk about that they really thought about it and they're like having the mice talk just wouldn't work for live action. They're like just what CGI would do. And I'm like, why didn't Disney remember that?
That when they went to do Jungle Book and then The
Lion
King.
and Little
That
Mermaid.
is
Yeah.
so funny. They're like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do it for these like three mice. You know what? Let's do an entire movie of talking lions that are
Yeah.
realistic and other animals.
Yeah.
That's gonna be perfect. That's so upsetting. It's so deeply upsetting. Also, I want to quickly point out, because this will be said by the step people later, their house is gorgeous. This whole estate is gorgeous.
Yes.
And it is not just some little country house. So I would just like to point that out because Kate Blanchett and those sisters just
Yeah.
wow.
I wish I could afford that home.
Oh yeah.
I wish I could afford a home.
A home.
Yeah. I can't imagine going into like a house like that and being like, so you couldn't decorate. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm looking at all the decorations being like, oh my gosh, that set piece is gorgeous. That set piece is gorgeous. Somebody needs to win an award for like all of this like swan chandelier that I'm like, oh, gorgeous. All these like candles. I was looking at everything being like, every piece of this, gorgeous, well thought through, love it. And then, they walk in, they're like, so this is trash. Like, you're trash.
It looks too like the dad travels. It's like they pull like there's stuff from all over the world in it. And it's like, oh, this is what he brought back from like Japan. This is what he.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's storytelling.
Yeah.
This movie I felt was like very well thought through. They put a lot of care into it. The costumers put a lot of care. The set designers put a lot of care. There have been other live actions where I feel like different departments they haven't given as good of a budget to or well thought through.
Yeah. It's like I never always want to blame. I don't want to blame those departments because I feel like they were given like a good enough kind of.
They were given $5 and some tokens from Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, because that's what like it's not the pictures of costumes for the live action like Snow White that have like come out the last like couple of years. Like people keep being like, oh, what's this costume department doing? And I was like, what are they not being given for budget? What are they not being given for like people working there for, because like man hours, it takes a lot of effort to make even like one dress, because like Cinderella's dress, like in this, it took a lot of people working around the clock together to like create this wardrobe. So it's like, it's not that the people that they've hired are necessarily incompetent. It's that the materials that they're not being allowed to like have access to for funding.
Yeah. There's been a recent conversation about the live action Avatar and like comparing different wigs, and the person was like, well, I'm a wig maker, and they were talking about like the time and money it takes to make like certain wigs. And it's like, that takes a lot of time and money. Like, are they being given the budget and the time to do that? And I think that happens with a lot of movies. And I don't say this because I'm not I actually enjoy Rachel Ziegler a lot, so I'm not one of the haters of that upcoming movie. But I do feel
we haven't seen it yet, so I don't want to diss it.
Yeah, but I do. Yeah, I hate when people diss things they haven't seen. And B, it's like I feel like it exists because of copyright laws in the image of Snow White. I'm saying I think that's why they're pushing it through. Also, the woke mob touches everything. Jack the Mouse is now Jacqueline.
Wow.
Yeah. Another
But
male role model stripped from us.
Stripped. Yep.
Yeah, wow.
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 Disney, the most woke corporation. Yeah. Uh and she's talking about like her mom's like, do you think the animals can understand you? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, I do believe they understand and they listen, and we just have to look after them. And who looks after us? Fairy godmothers. Do you believe in those? She's like, I believe in everything. And that's where I wrote, wow, she's so me. Because that's kind of my solution to things. I'm like, nah, I believe in everything. But then if someone suggests something supernatural as a solution to something, I'm like, wait, really? But theoretically, yes, I believe in everything. This is once again Disney struggling with how to explain what a fairy godmother is. Uh, yeah, we talked about that in
Yeah.
Wish. We're trying to come up with an origin story. It's just it's a French literary Catholic thing that they're stuck
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, that truly is what it is, where they're like, oh, a fairy godmother, where do they come from? And it's like, well, I mean, in the Catholic sense of it, like godmothers are something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you like apply that to a broader audience now that like the majority of the Disney's audience, which is like the globe, uh aren't familiar with Catholicism, don't care as much about like
Yeah.
Godparents.
yeah, those kind of references. And so yeah, it's like, oh, what do we do with this character?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really I honestly think they just need to, the Disney animated didn't explain it. I just think they don't have to explain what it is.
Yeah.
But you know, they're struggling. So you know, we meet her father and mother. He travels, he gives her like the little butterfly origami thing on Papillon. He's teaching
Hmm.
her French. Lavender's Blue is like the song the mom sings.
And they have
Uh
a beautiful family dynamic.
yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't think in any of the other movies that we've watched that we get that, where we get her in that setting, so we're actually seeing why she is the way she is. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think Brandy, like, there's reference to her parents and
Yeah.
that she pulls strength from them. Animated is like they
What's a
just
parent, you
she's
know?
young
Yeah.
when they're dead. Like it's like this has been going on to her for years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then Camilla does not give a shit about her dead parents.
No. Yeah,
Yeah.
Camilla herself does not care about her dead parents.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Because I'm
Camilla
like,
Cinderella does not care about her
Yeah.
dead parents. I cannot speak to Camilla and her relationship with her actual parents.
Yeah.
and that's what like it's interesting because like the Charles Perrault, like it starts like first sentence with just like her mom is dead. So anyway, her dad marries this guy. And that's very much where like the animated one starts too, of
Yeah.
like forget no backstory. And so this one, it was like to give backstory like that, they had to pull from Grimm.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
for them to do that. And so it was very much like the Grimm story like beginning.
And
Mhm.
the mom does play a bigger role in a lot of different versions of Cinderella across
Yeah.
the globe, especially because many versions the dad isn't even dead. So it's
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
they did, yeah, they took what worked from different versions. Um because the mom, she gets a bout of Victorian novel disease.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She just suddenly is like
And she
I'm faint.
faints. Yeah.
And then she's like, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm dying. I have to go. I do love you.
That's exactly how
And
it happened.
she looked so I was like looking at this, I was like, this woman looks so gorgeous right now.
So
Just
healthy.
so healthy. I was like, she's not ill with what? She wasn't even like sweaty, no like
No.
ghostly pallor, like no like jaundiced skin, like
I mean,
nothing. She just looked gorgeous.
it's
And I'm like,
hard to make Hallie Atwell look ill and gross looking because
Yeah.
yeah.
she is just so beautiful. So,
Especially in this world that they created where it is like um very fairy tale sickly sweet.
Very
Like,
colorful, very
yes.
like
Yeah.
Thomas Kincaid painting, like
Yeah, Thomas Kincaid
Kincaid.
painting. Yes, that's exactly the
yeah.
look.
I mean, I wonder if it's almost, you could argue that it's how Cinderella sees the world. That's the whole thing, is she sees it as how it could be, of like
Right.
she sees vibrant colors.
Oh, I
Uh
love that because
Yeah.
it's like she, even when her mother's like sick and dying, she's looking at her like, you are the most like beautiful, wonderful creature to me in the
Yeah.
world. Like you're the ultimate. And it's like no matter what her mom looked like to her mom was like always this like goddess level, like gorgeous woman.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's my beef with Oprah and 2010's diet culture, is because they would say things to people about like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, and like you're a kid looking at your family and your mom or whatever, and you're like, oh, that's
Yeah.
the most beautiful person in the world.
Yeah.
No,
Mm.
why are you saying they need to be different?
Yeah.
Yeah, so whenever I think people are trying to bring that culture back, I'm saying stop it now.
Yeah.
Uh, not what Cinderella would want. So she tells her, instead of be good and pious in Brothers Grimm, it's much more direct, yet also vague enough for modern audiences. Have courage and be kind.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh, which, I always loved courage was my word as an orientation leader. So I was like, wow, this is my new motto. Thanks, Disney. Thanks, corporation. But I mean, it is good. It's nice. It's good advice. And yeah, and she's like, and now I must go, and she dies. So they're mourning her. The life goes on. Cinderella grows up. How old is she?
18 to 23.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe 17 to 23,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
Yeah, because again, in the Disney version, this was happening to her as a child.
I was gonna say it would make more sense if she was probably like 17 to 20, because I feel like at a certain point she would technically be an old maiden,
Yeah.
and that could be at like 22. You know,
Yeah.
you're
But
an
it's
old maiden. Get out of here.
but it's one of those situations where you look at the actress and you as like an adult know how old the actress looks. And so
Yeah.
you're like, you're a little older than 17.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different dynamic, but if we're talking about, is Cinderella fundamentally a story about abuse and child abuse? Yes, you're a legally an adult at 18, though I think in olden times it was 21, but at least in England, but it's still, if that's your family, if that's your home dynamic, you're not like
Yeah.
an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old are two very different kinds of adults.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
know that's sometimes a hot take, but I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so she's reading to her dad, and she's like, I love a happy ending, and he's like, what about a new happy ending for me? Sir Francis Tremaine's wife died. She's alone.
No, he died. His wife
Yeah,
is alone.
his wife is alive. Yeah.
I was
That
like,
would
well,
be
if she died and then they got together, perfect.
that would be yeah, I'm like, that would be such a progressive story.
Yeah.
Like,
Even
Look at
gays
that.
can be the evil step
Yeah.
parent now.
There you go. Equality. That's true equality.
uh Not just queer coded villains, queer villains. But I do someday we could live in a world where we could actually do that and it wouldn't
Yeah.
be terrible. So that's my Cinderella dream. So they
Well, have courage and be kind.
of
Maybe it'll
course.
come true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will end homophobia. All right, so she's like, you're scared to tell me, it's okay. You can remarry, but you can see that she's like, I don't know if I love that, but okay.
Yeah.
Uh, she's doing her best, and so she's getting a new family and she's thinking, have courage and be kind. Now, I do want to say, if you took a shot every time they said have courage and be kind in this movie, I do not advise to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd be pretty toasty, if
Yeah.
not on your way to the hospital,
Yeah.
depending on what you're drinking. If it's a White
Yeah.
Claw, you'll be fine.
Not to mention, I feel like their Cinderella took it to a point. I understand she had internalized it as a child from like her mom. She took it to a point where it was like a toxic poison to herself. And I don't feel like they ever actually fully addressed that in the
Yeah.
movie,
Interesting. Yeah.
which I I had a problem with, because it's like there is being kind to other people, and even like being going ahead and being kind to people that are treating you badly, or that you don't like or that you have a tough time with, but then there is like letting people abuse you for their
Yeah.
comfort, where I'm like, that no, that's not being kind. That's not
Yeah.
letting people, that sounds very
I know what you mean. I know that also
Yeah.
that sounds bad, but it's like I think it is such a tough thing to portray, to like, how do you not victim blame but also be like,
yeah.
you don't just you know, like that kind of martyrdom aspect.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think there's things that in an odd way the animated does better in that regard,
Yeah.
you know, or just different versions with like Brandy, you know, like of, you can't always put up with this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think they said, oh, we wanted to do a version where she'd be fine even if she never met the prince. And I'm like, I feel like that doesn't work, because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
she's in a bad situation and she won't be fine.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's about, because when we talked about the Brandy one, we talked about how she's learning to respect herself and learning to start establishing those boundaries where she can get the courage to leave her situation. And in this one, I think you're right that like, um, not to say that, you know, she's letting them abuse her, but like she's not looking for those ways to develop her self-respect,
Yeah.
because that has been ingrained in her, like, you just need to be nice to people, just be nice to people, and that will pay off. And
Yeah,
it isn't
she
always the case. Like
Yeah.
otherwise you're losing your self-respect by being kind all the time. You could do
Yeah.
that. So
there's even a point where it seems like she's gonna learn that. And I have issues with the climax of this movie. This is where I have the most notes. And also,
Yeah.
you know, in the animated, we talk about how, you know, just based on the context of the 50s, let alone Perot's time, like what
Yeah.
Cinderella's options are. And this movie does explicitly say that she does have other options. So that changes.
Yeah.
I'm like, cut that scene, cut that scene, you know, like
yeah.
Yeah, because it's counterproductive to the point you're trying to make. Yeah.
yeah. So the new step family moves in. Lady Tremaine arrives with an iconic hat moment.
Uh-huh.
Her cat Lucifer
On a leash.
on a leash. Drizella and Anastasia. They do basically Regina George, but in reverse. You know how she's like, "Oh, I love your skirt," and then she's like, "That's the fuggliest
Ugliest.
fucking skirt." And this, they're like, her hair's so stringy, and they're like, "Oh, I love your hair."
Uh,
Yeah, and they talk about how skinny she is, and I'm like, oh, SMH. She's in a corset.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're living in the house, they're having parties and the like. They change outfits, which Cinderella does not do.
ever.
Ever.
Except for this time. It's over here. I'll
Yeah.
learn it eventually. I could not be a weather person.
Lady Lady Germain's, her costumes, I felt like, oh, so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like where
Yeah.
I was like, you are an icon. I was finding myself being like, I want to be this woman. Like I see myself as this like woman. I like, it's horrible that I'm like, I see her and I'm just like, yes, yes to this. Cause like I feel like in the animated one, they made her like just a lot like
Matronly.
matronly. Yes, like that's a perfect word. And in this one they were like, no, like obviously she's the age that she is, in a very like sexy, very glam, very like
Mhm.
femme fatale kind of way. Like
Yeah.
where I was just like, oh, I love you.
Like the way
Yes.
she carries herself, the way she's
Yes.
done. And I do really like the way they did her as a villain, as an antagonist, where she has nuance, but it doesn't excuse
Yes.
Yes.
her. And this was
Yeah.
right after like Maleficent, you know, so it's like
Yeah.
they this this was much better than like Gaston has PTSD from the war.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't excuse why she acts the way she does, but you're like, oh, I get it. Like she still
Yes.
sucks, but
Yeah.
like it adds a humanity to it because so first the mice and Lucifer have some antics, but she protects them from Lucifer, and she has a girl support girls moment. Lean in. She's like, we must stick together, Jacqueline. They're like, okay, what do we do? All her other antagonists are female.
We need to give her a lady friend. We'll
A
make
Yeah.
it
mouse.
we'll make it a mouse.
So she talks to her dad and she's upset because he's going away again. And she asks for the branch that hits him in the head so that he can have it and he can think of her. And when she gets it, it'll be that he's with it.
Which I thought that was a really clever like write-in that they did, because it goes back to like you just retold like the Grimm's story, and it's such a weird moment in the Grimm story that's kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what?
Why?
Where it's like the sisters are like, oh, I want this thing, and then she's like, I want the twig that touches you, and it's like just weird in the
Yeah.
Grimm's version. And in this, it's like they give that reference, they give that callback to that source material, but then they also give her kind of like a reason behind it of her being like, I want you to think of me, and when you're back here, like I just want that token to know that you were thinking of me on the trip, and I was like, that's such a clever way to make it make sense.
Yeah, and because
Yeah.
she basically ends that thought with, because when you give it to me, you'll be back home, and that's what I really want. I just want you
Yeah.
to come back home.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it sort of has this full circle. It is really good.
And
Yeah.
it's also she's not in abject poverty at this point. So like she doesn't really need things. She has like a nice house, she has nice stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come across as, I think we talked in Beauty and the Beast, like when we read some of those, where it's like, oh yeah, my bitch sisters want stuff. I just
Yeah.
want a rose, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
they frame it well. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh, be good to your step family. And this is where the
Even
stepmom,
though they're trying, because
they're
because
trying.
she's overhearing them, Lady
Yeah.
Tremaine, and she's hearing her husband say that she and her daughters are trying sometimes. Ooh, that sets her
Ooh.
off ever so
Yeah.
slightly. You can
And
see it.
I mean, same. If I were that, maybe not to the same level, but and like, oh, your mom's everywhere in this house. And yeah, it's pro tip. If you're in an old-timey house and you're having a conversation, you will be eavesdropped on. We
Yeah.
talked about
Yeah.
Downton Abbey, that was eavesdropping the show.
Yes,
Yeah.
quite literally. Also, she Lady Tremaine is very triggered, even though that word means nothing now. She is actually very triggered by any mention of his former wife, because when we meet her, she's like, "Oh, you never told me your daughter was so beautiful," and he's like, "Oh yeah, he takes after her," and it's like a really tense moment ever
Yeah.
so briefly. So she is very triggered by him having a previous wife.
Which like
Yeah.
it's like speak about competing with an ex. It's like your saintly dead
Yeah.
wife who's like forever hallowed in your
Yep.
memory,
Yeah.
in your first love or whatever. And I'm like your second shot who you find trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which to me, I found it puzzling when she then was talking about how she had married for love, and
Yeah.
then that love had died. And I was like, then why can't you have empathy for your husband, like your new husband, who is like, I really loved my first wife, and she had really loved her first husband.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and that, I don't know, it made me question, like her lack of empathy made me kind of question, like, did you love your first husband? Like it,
Right.
or in like the same way. I don't know.
I,
But
I I think she's just like a not empathetic person. Like she doesn't
yeah.
have
Yeah.
that value. She's just about
Yeah.
scraping to survive for herself, which
Yeah.
is, a lot of like in the society they're implying, but are kind of scared to admit.
Yeah.
It's like as a woman, like that was like her like who you're married to is like how you get food on the table. Like
Yeah.
that's where her income comes from.
Yeah.
So like that's a reality of a lot of women historically, was they had to be
Yeah.
that way to survive.
Yeah. It seems like it was like the second that that husband like died, she just immediately went into like survival mode and was like okay, I can't have love for anybody. I can't have that kind of attachment for anything. I need to just like secure my place and like my position wherever. And
Yeah.
Secure the
so
bag at all costs.
yeah, and so it's like in her grief, yeah, it's like she lost her ability to empathize.
Mhm.
Which is a great contrast, if you're contrasting your hero and your antagonist,
Yeah.
like how they cope with grief.
Yeah.
Uh, which yeah, I think it's one of the things this movie does well. But yeah,
Yeah.
but I do kind of blame the dad. I do blame
Yeah.
him. It's like you
Yeah.
set it up this way.
Yeah. It's like he needs to also be more sensitive to like the situation.
Yeah, because he says they can be trying, not like I know you find them trying at times. Or maybe you don't always get along. No, he's like, oh,
Yeah.
they suck, I know,
It's
but
like I know, but
Yeah.
please.
yeah,
And then putting that responsibility
On
like
her.
onto her, the child, to
Yeah.
be like, oh, can you please like take care of them and like handle this? It's like that's not her job. That shouldn't have
yeah,
to be her job.
Yeah. And that's again reinforcing that, be kind element, that like he's also putting the responsibility of keeping the peace at the house on
Yeah.
her, you know. I
Yeah.
doubt he
yeah.
had this conversation with his wife, his now wife. So
Yeah. I doubt that he went to like his now wife and said, "Hey, can you make sure that your daughters are like
a little
at least
nicer.
nicer?" They like got out of the carriage and immediately were saying rude things to my daughter as if she was stupid, and I don't appreciate that as their
Yeah.
father. Can or as her father, can you as their mom have a conversation with them? But like
Yeah.
he
No.
not, at least not on camera that we saw, was there any effort
Right.
made. But it's like when you go to the person that you know is like the nicest, most with the most tendency to like people please, and you're like, oh, can it now be your responsibility to smooth everything over and just like
Because
take
that's
one for the
easier.
team? Yeah.
Yeah. I
That's
And
that's
think
an easier thing for him. That's an easier
yeah,
conversation for him to have.
which like me, when I see people that are like very much people pleasers, I'm like, protect them. They will say yes. So it's now your responsibility to make sure that you're only asking them to say yes to things that will not hurt them, because
Mhm.
you know that they love you so much that they'll do anything. But I don't want them to do something that would hurt them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
yeah.
I'm like this dad. I'm like, no, you know that your daughter is like this. So instead of putting all this labor on her, you need to be like, okay, I know that she will be prone to giving them whatever they want and loving them no matter what. I need to protect her assets from her own kindness. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a thing like this, what makes this version of Cinderella relatable to many a people pleaser. And like why it's like, oh, it's like the human aspect of it, but no one ever says you shouldn't have had to do that. And again, it's
yeah.
it's always the dad's fault in any version of Cinderella. It's like there
Yes.
were other widows.
Yeah.
There were other
Yeah.
I'm
widows.
sure of that, in fact.
Yes.
Yeah. So meanwhile, like he's gone, and her stepmom is like, oh, like don't cry, like don't make a fuss. He's like, oh, sorry, stepmother. Oh, don't call me that.
I
Madam
And
mean,
will do.
call me madam.
yeah.
Oh,
And she's like, oh, and the girls are fighting. She's like, oh, they're fine, their bedroom confining. And Cinderella's like, oh, well, I have the second biggest room. She's like, oh, why don't we just like switch rooms? Which does make sense. Is a good idea. She's like, oh yeah, and you'll go in the attic.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I do love that it's like Cinderella knows she's being taken advantage of in that moment, but she doesn't know, because of politeness, she doesn't know how to say that.
How to handle it. Yeah.
And I find myself in that situation a lot where it's like, oh, I know you read me and see me as someone you can take advantage of, and I see it happening, but I don't know how to say no in this situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
So
she picks up her mom's stuff and he's like, here, take this shit with you too.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
bric-a-brac. Like,
Yes.
like, oh my gosh.
And so she goes up there and she's like, okay, we'll make this work. Oh, this is where the mice friends hide. And the stepsisters are like, who
Toxic
is she talking
positivity.
to? Yeah.
Toxic positivity.
Yeah.
Like the there is something nice about like, oh wow, she's like really just like she's taking this in stride, but then I'm also like, but girl, come on.
That was
Yeah.
to compare her to the animation. Like animated Cinderella, like knew it sucked and like was just kind of
Yeah.
like, like
Mhm.
she was at the end of her rope.
Yeah.
And in some ways, what's sort of aspirational about this one is that she can rise above it all. And I'm like, wow, couldn't be me. I'm
Yeah.
animated Cinderella. I'm stressed and depressed about
Well,
it.
also, if you think about it, she's also, we're seeing that transition from her normal life to being the servant. We see that transition. We're
Yeah.
experiencing it. So, I mean, she hasn't put in the same years as animated Cinderella yet.
Yeah,
Like, this is day one.
That is true. Because
that's true.
I did think that that journey was really interesting because since it didn't start in the same place as the animated version, you did get to see this process of how it happened slowly, how it was, how abuse happens like over time in a
Mhm.
sense where you almost don't feel it happening because it doesn't happen all at once. It starts with those little things of
Yes.
like, oh, don't call me mom, call me
Yeah.
madam.
Yeah.
Oh, would you be able to pick up a couple extra chores? Oh, would you be able to? And it's like this like slow progression into this point where it's you get there and you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
how did this happen? It
How did
happened
I get
so
here?
slowly. Yeah, like the boiling the frog analogy, if like people have heard it, of just like
Yeah.
raising the temperature slowly that you don't notice. It's you're watching that in this movie happen.
It is,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a masterclass of like manipulation and abuse and like how we see every step. Because like the next thing is like she's friends with the servants, she's happily going about her chores. They mention the stepsisters aren't accomplished at keeping house, and I'm like, okay, this trad wife energy, but and then but they're not really accomplished in the Jane Austen sense either.
They're not talented at anything.
Yeah, like wow, I'm attacked. And but they're like they can't sing, they can't draw, and Lady Tremaine knows it, and
And
Oh yeah.
she catches Cinderella being like, or Ella at this point, like hearing her sing, being like, oh, yikes, and then Cinderella's like, oh, I didn't say that, I didn't.
And she does that thing where she just like, oh, and she drops something, and Ella, because I would like to call her by her proper
Yeah,
name, she like notices it and she immediately goes over and picks it up for her. And that's like the first thing of like, I'm gonna test this girl's boundaries of like
yes,
how much I can get her to do for me. Uh
yeah,
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 so it's really, really interesting.
and because she
Uh
doesn't know how to set boundaries because everyone else in her life has always been good.
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
That's so it is actually on the parents. They have not set her up for the real world. That,
yeah,
her parents had lived and she had been married off, who knows what that situation would have been like? Could she have also been in an abusive situation then because
yeah,
she didn't learn how to set those boundaries because everyone she encountered was nice to her?
yeah,
Wow. This is Cinderella month gets very real. And
yeah,
it
yeah.
and it
I'm like, oh, this is a lot of therapy conversation. Like where I'm just like, I'm like, you have to protect people pleasers. I have a thing, and I'm like in my head, like maybe a thing to discuss in therapy, like,
there.
but it's like, oh yeah, she never encountered anybody bad. How do you encounter people bad? I'm like, yes, to bring up in
Up in
therapy.
therapy.
This is
So I was watching Cinderella and it gave me all these thoughts. Your therapist is like, uh-huh, okay. Wow.
Which
like yipes.
because I mean Cinderella is fundamentally a story about abuse and family dynamics in a way
Yeah,
like
Yeah.
Supernatural Romance Month, how we had to keep going back to the institution of slavery and how that affected what we see as monstrous and like so it's these things always connect to something deeper than even we think when we
yeah,
plan the month.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Gosh. I thought we
uh,
were gonna have, like a jolly old time.
Yeah.
A jolly, as the captain says.
On a lighter note, I was gonna say this moment in the movie with Kate Blanchett, like I was like, she's such an amazing actress.
Yes.
The like her posing for the drawing and her daughter like flips it around, the face that she made of that you could see all of it in her eyes of like that's
Nice.
horrible. Like in her brain, she's thinking that's horrible, but she's also like, this is my daughter, and I don't want to hurt my daughter's feelings. And so it's like that moment of her being, you can see in her incredible actress face that all that was going on. And then to have Ella also realizing, oh my gosh, like the singing over here is like atrocious. Her being like, oh, my daughter's drawing is not good. And then hearing somebody else thinking that her daughter's singing isn't good. And then she was like, how dare you think that? And it's like,
Yeah.
sweetie, it's because you know what your daughters are capable of. And it's okay. Not everybody has to have them talents, but you can't take that out on Ella for being like, how dare you also notice that my daughters have
Yeah, really. How dare you have eyes and ears?
Yes.
Yeah. It is it's everyone every face in this movie, there's like 5 different things going on. Like they really brought out good performances.
They did.
So this is when, we get word, from her father. The farmer shows up and he has the branch and he's like, your father took ill on the road. Another case of Victorian novel disease.
Man,
It's
it's
a
really going
plague. It's a
around.
pandemic. Yeah. And he's like, he spoke only of you and your mother.
Oof. For Lady Tremaine.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
daughters are just like, what about my parasol? And she's like, oh, girls, don't be stupid. We're ruined financially. That doesn't matter. And so Ella's just ultimately alone holding the branch. And she's like, oh, thank you. That must have been really hard for you to do.
That line hurt me.
Yeah.
Because I was like, that's that level of toxic where that wanting to be so kind to other people that you are neglecting yourself. Because it was like, no, sweetie, not, oh, that must have been hard for you for that guy. He feels bad that he just had to tell you something that is horrible for you. It's okay for you to like delve into your grief and not be catering to everybody else's emotions right now. Like, you don't need to handle this man's emotions. Those are his emotions to sort out.
Yeah.
It's okay for you to be absolutely devastated on this doorstep.
Yeah. It's almost like a way for her to not have to think about how she's feeling. She's like, oh, if I can be like, oh, this must be hard for him. But yeah, she slides down the door. We love a sliding down the wall crying moment. But this scene is genuinely pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And she's just holding the branch, which was supposed to be, oh, I get this branch because my dad's coming home. And now he's never coming home.
And it could have been the last thing that he like ever held, that he ever did, was give me this. Ugh,
yeah.
It's devastating.
Actually, I've seen some of the cut scenes for this, and there's some where I don't think they should have been cut, but there was much more of like the mourning and like her packing up her father's things and like all that. And I'm like, this is rough. This is really sad. And so she is, like they're struggling financially. They have to dismiss all the staff who are her friends, witnesses, support.
Yeah, witnesses to this abuse.
And so they give her all the chores to distract her. They go, it'll distract you,
Well, because it's the voiceover that says, oh, she was happy to pick up extra chores because she had distractions, and her family was more than happy to give Ella more distractions.
Yeah.
And I think that's like really key, that like we get it from the voiceover. It's not something that is textual in the film itself.
Yeah. And so she's being treated like a servant. She's being malnourished because they literally give her scraps. I'm like, that's how she fits into that tiny horse.
Exactly.
She is not developing properly. Good thing she got to the prince before she started like losing her hair.
Yeah, really.
Like, and she's sharing with the mice and the animals, classic fairy tale kindness. But so girl, like you're not being fed. And she sleeps in the fireplace because the attic is cold. And she's
Yep.
like, oh, and so that's where they're the next morning. They do actually, I think they actually put the cinders on her face. Because in Brandy's and Camilla's Cinderella, they mention the Cinderella thing, but they never actually have
And
cinders.
but yeah, because she
Neither
was
in the
sleeping like
Disney version.
Yeah.
she was sleeping in front of it, and so like obviously as it was kind of going out, it was probably blowing the dust onto her
Yeah.
face. So yeah, when she wakes up in the morning,
She
like
actually does have it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's we actually get the scene of them coming up with this very clever nickname
So
for her.
smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like, because she's setting up breakfast, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna call you Cinderella, Cinderella," and then they're like, "Whose place is this?" And they're like, "Oh," she's like, "Oh, it's mine," and they're like, "Oh, it's too much
Yeah,
for you
it's
to."
too much for you, darling. You know, you might want to just eat in the kitchen after the work is done. And it's
And
like she's completely being exiled from her own house.
Yeah.
yeah, and you see, this is where she's like, "Oh, how does it get here?" And they talk about names have power, which is the thing in fairy tales, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, now
Yeah.
she's been named this, and how did she become this creature?
Hmm.
This like treated as subhuman. And so she rides off into the forest on her horse. Uh, and she sees a stag who's being hunted, and she's like, "Oh, go, go, run!" But it spooks her horse, and so the prince who's riding sees her in trouble, and is like, "Time for a meet cute," and saves her. And they're talking, and she's like, "Oh, you really frightened the stag," and he's like, "Do you know him?"
She's like, no, I did just meet him, and I looked into his eyes, and he looked into my eyes, and I knew that he had more life to live. And I was like, you go, girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, I live at the palace. I'm an apprentice, learning it my trade." Or he's
Yeah,
like, "I'm learning my
he's
trade." And she's like, "Oh, you're an apprentice." And he's like, "Yeah."
he's like, you don't know who I am. And she's like, no.
No.
And I love that. She doesn't even falter. She's like, who are you?
Yeah. There are moments where I'm like, maybe you could have put this together. Because later when they're like, "Oh, you're Heidi," he's like, I'm Kit, my name's Kit. I'm like,
Yeah.
you didn't pick up on anything
Yeah.
weird there.
No,
I
no,
was
no,
like, he
no.
did not handle that smooth. So yeah, it'd be like at that point, I'd be like, why is this man screaming at those people? I'm Kit. Like, yeah, don't they know you? They can see you. Why are you
Yeah.
Yeah.
screaming?
Well, I think it's also she's very sheltered. And I think going back to like the politeness, the toxic positivity thing is that like she doesn't want to think that he's lying to her
Yeah.
because she's
Yeah.
never had people lie to her,
Yeah.
you
To
know, so
me,
she doesn't know. She's like, what's a lie? Everything is true, right?
yeah. And to me also, like, a lot of the tone in this film felt very like theatrical. And
Hmm.
so like that moment, it felt very much like theater. Like
Yes.
something that you would let happen like in like live theater, because you're like, oh, like a loud whisper or whatever, where you're like, obviously if I can hear it, the person on the other end of the stage, could like hear, but you're like, oh, that this is theater, they're trying to give me information, or like
Yeah.
play this
Yeah.
scene up for me, the audience, without fully like saying it. And that's what that kind of like had felt like to me.
Yeah.
But I like that read too, of like it goes back to, she's not used to like people being liars, people trying to manipulate, people trying, and so like when that happens, she's not necessarily picking up on it.
Yeah.
He is like, she does that. Oh, he's like, "Oh, are you treated well?" And she's like, "Oh, as well as they're able." He's like, "Oh, like, is that that's not your doing?" She's like, "Yeah, I know, but we just have to have courage and be kind." He's like, "Okay, yeah, that's cool." And the book, I think they cut it from the movie, but the book says that it's textual, that he just got back from war.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
that he's like, "Oh, like, war's violent and horrible, and she's so nice." But she's like, "Oh, it's great that you have a job. You're an apprentice."
A
Um,
working man. I
a
like that.
working man. And she's like, just don't kill the stag. He's like, oh, it's what's done. She's like, just because it's what's done doesn't mean it's what should be done.
Mm-hmm.
And it is maybe take some of that energy to your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like stags shouldn't be hunted, but neither should your family treat you like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Just
Yeah.
because it is currently what's being done to you, Ella, doesn't mean that it is what should be done to you, Ella.
Yeah. And there is a cut scene. This is also kind of a reference to the cut scene from the animated one where the prince was going to have a deer friend that he pretended to hunt.
Oh.
Yeah, but they're like, we can't
Wait, he had
animate a
a
man that
dear
well.
friend
A
that he
deer, like a
pretended to hunt.
yes.
And that was like supposed to be a game.
Yeah.
Okay, if I was a deer, I would not want my human friend to pretend to hunt me. But you know what? To each their own.
To each their own. Maybe that's why it was cut, not because they didn't know how to animate an attractive man.
Yeah, they're like, this is just a very confusing message in relationship.
No, I just thought we'd reuse some of the Bambi stuff. So let's do our Perot check-in. So we do these check-ins, but so much of this movie has gone by because so much we're in the first prologue. We're the first sentence of Charles Perrault.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're probably 30 minutes into the movie at least.
30, 40, yeah.
Yeah.
So father and mother are dead. Stepmom is main antagonist. So unlike Perrault or Grimm, father's dead. That's classic for modern adaptations.
Yeah.
Stepsisters are beautiful, like in Grimm. We have Cinderella getting her name. We have the branch, like from the Brothers Grimm, and a message from her mother from the Grimm. So it's very much because Perrault has no prologue.
Yeah.
We're not, and we have the now kind of standard Prince and Cinderella meet before the ball moment.
Yeah.
Back to the movie. Back to after a quick little check-in. Prince, he's enamored with her. She's good, and the king's like, "Well, you got to marry a princess." And we get bad news from the doctor.
Another dying parent. Victorian novel disease strikes again.
It's really, that's what she needs to do when she becomes queen. She needs to be like, we need to fight this pandemic of Victorian novel disease.
Let's come up with some sanitary standards for our kingdom so we can prevent Victorian novel disease.
Yeah, because it's seriously, the doctor is like listening to like his heart or like listening to his lungs, whatever, and then is like, like, oh,
it's not good.
I won't tell you what I heard, but it doesn't sound good in that man. What were you listening to?
This king is very different from the animated one, which is good. Thank God. I'm worried for animated Cinderella living in the same house as him. But he's like, we have to get to our appointment. Punctuality is the politeness of princes. Interesting. I love that quote. It's such a fun little royal thing.
I see your next note. Let's spend the next hour talking about these pants.
The white pants.
Okay.
I am in white.
In general. The pants in general. This movie understands that people like looking at man butts and other things, but man butts especially. I'm going to use the polite version. I guess that's all I have to say is just pants.
I mean, they're very, I'm wearing baseball pants right now, actually, with this costume, but they're
fantastic. I'm sure your butt looks great.
Man, have you guys ever gotten into like mariachi, like watching like mariachi? The uniform of mariachi is very much like, please listen to this man sing and look what he's got here
going on.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's like the straight leg pants and they're very tailored, but these in this movie are like those are leggings.
They're
leggings. Those are
leggings,
sweetie.
But the costumes are impeccable. They all look great.
Every general's like costume, like the jackets tailored to a point. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, like how could you not act like a Prince Charming in like what he's wearing? He looks amazing.
Look at him behind you. He has one little swoop of hair.
Yeah,
and that
his like
fantastic.
And the way that all the colors have been like oversaturated, like his eyeballs, his bright blue eyeballs. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, he's
mesmerizing.
He's a handsome man, but they really knew how to make him look like Prince Charming.
Yeah.
And so we talked also about in the Camilla Cinderella, I was like, what the pants they put this poor prince in are not good. They were scared. But because Richard Madden talked about how in all the publicity art they had to like seat her or place her to cover his junk, essentially, because like he had to like wear things or they tried different things and it wasn't working, like to try and not be as exposed on camera. I think he didn't want to wear a dance belt or something. It's but it was a thing.
You know, I imagine it must have been very uncomfortable and that does suck. But we do have to give credit to the fact that everyone looked fantastic.
Yeah.
So, you know,
everyone looked good.
In case anyone was worried, don't worry, you guys looked great. I'm sorry it was uncomfortable. Truly. But thank you for your service.
Thank you. Yeah. And so he's talking, the Grand Duke is throwing shade at him for letting the stag go free and being like, you got to marry a princess for advantage. So we have if the king is the antagonist, the Grand Duke has been given that job of being the bad royal.
Yeah.
And the captain is his best friend, the only named character of color. And his name is the captain.
Is that really his name? He doesn't have an actual like name.
I think it's just the captain. Yeah.
Oh damn.
Man,
so
and I'm like, the captain was like his costume, just like when I'm talking about the generals like wearing their I was looking at like his vest and how like fitted it was.
And he's a broad man
he
too.
Was
so like I think that just like accentuated his shoulders and stuff. He looked so like regal. It was really good.
They knew how to dress him too, because I feel like some people know how to
really tall.
Yeah,
he's
people know
one
how
of the
to
tallest people there.
They know how to dress a very certain body type, and then anything else they like can't do. And it's like, but they're like, no, we're gonna make him look good too. Everyone looked great.
Yeah, he looked so good.
Yeah.
I'm like, he for me was the male character that I was looking at the most. I like bigger boys.
Cue the SNL song, like a big boy.
Yeah, like it's cuffing season. And for me all the time, I'm like, yes, this is correct.
Yeah. And also, so you guys had mentioned Downton Abbey. There's also a lot of people from, or not a lot, but a couple people from Game of Thrones. So obviously Richard Madden, and then also this guy, the captain. I don't know exactly what the character's name is because it's very foreign, and it always sounds like he says his last name is Duck Sauce, so I kept referring to him as Duck Sauce. And I meant to look it up before this, what his character's name was, but
I've never seen any Game of Thrones, which is shocking considering what like a fantasy nerd I must be. And I'm like, why haven't I haven't seen any Game of Thrones.
It's an investment of time and energy and mental health for sure. Especially if you like things that end well and are written well at the end and all the way through consistently. And also just like all the other things that are in that culture with like, you know, the violence and stuff. So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
But I would recommend the first 4 seasons and then just pretend it didn't go on from there.
All right. Nice.
Yeah. So they're like, he's like, let's open the ball to everyone. He's being painted by a very sassy painter.
This painter was weird. Where did they get this man?
Like that was one of those things where I was like, I either want more of this man as comedic relief because like he is being very funny and I love that, but also it was weird to have him just
once.
Once.
Yeah.
Especially how long they spent when they dropped him on the floor and he was like, oh, I guess I'm down here now. Okay. All right. I guess I'm down here. And I was like, this is a very long time for this gag.
And he's like looks at the prince while he's on the floor. He's like, I'm so sorry, but this is a great angle. You have great nostrils. I'm going to paint them. And he's like, can I get a longer brush? And that's the button it ends on. And I was like, that was 45 seconds of my life I'll never get back.
Yeah. Like this was a very weird little shtick for like for it just being this short little thing. I was like, I either want more of this character
Or none.
or cut him.
I think
Yeah.
he was on set and everyone was like, this is so funny. And so like everyone remembered it being so funny. And then us as the audience who weren't there are kind of like, okay.
Guess she had to be there.
Yeah. Uh so yeah, they're opening the ball, but they're like, you because we gotta brighten people's spirits, you know. And he's like, okay, but because of the wars, this is I think where he does say, you know, the wars have been hard on us all. And so the Grand Duke's like, okay, but you got to marry a princess then if we open it to everyone, because he's talking about marrying a country girl, and they're like, no, that's not your job.
No.
And so they announce it, and so we're at the market for this announcement, and this is the scene. I'm like, just cut it, because her friend is like, why do you leave when they treat you so? And she's like, oh, my parents love that old house, and now they're gone. I love it for them.
So she's doing it for the house.
Yeah, which she
Slash her parents, but more so the house. But
Yeah.
also, if she's doing it for the house, she's not doing anything to stop Lady Tremaine from redecorating.
yeah. I
I
just
don't know.
I that didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
I think it's that obligatory, like, you know, people are always asking the question of Cinderella, well, why didn't she leave if they were treating them that like that, or if they were treating her like that? That was their answer. That was the Beauty and the
Yeah.
Beast inserting those things. Luckily, they only had
The only
a couple other small things, but
yeah, it didn't. I'm like, I think the reality is it's like I have no like real skills for a
Yeah.
job, you know, and like this is my house, this is where I feel safe, like abuse,
she was a
women's
merchant's
rights.
daughter. What
Yeah.
was she really learning to be? Probably just a wife.
A wife, yeah.
And so, like, yeah, she doesn't have skills to go out on her own. Yes, this is the house she grew up in, and also she's suffering from toxic positivity, so she like doesn't quite know how to handle the situation yet. So yeah, I don't know,
Yeah.
this unnamed friend.
She was one of the servants from
Yeah.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but there she gets news of the ball and she's like, oh, I'm gonna meet my friend who works at the palace. Great. And she runs home to tell them, and they're all like, amazing, amazing. Okay, this is our chance to be saved from ruin. We're gonna go back to town before the seamstress is drowning in work, get 3 dresses. And she's like, "Oh, it's so sweet that you thought of me." And they're like, poor slow
Girl, they don't even
cinders.
let you sit at the breakfast table. You
Yeah.
thought they were giving you a dress? Oh, yeah. I mean, I think she's a DBU alum. She might be just a little bit in this moment.
That's me and her go way back to DBU.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was like she was like, oh, finally, like me being kind to them is paid off, and they're gonna do a kind thing to me. It's like
True. Yeah.
what? And it was like, what would make you think that? What clues have they ever given you that they were gonna do something
She
suddenly?
sees the
suddenly
world
kind?
as it could be, Katrina. That's what Helena Bonham Carter is gaslighting us. She's like, you know, all these terrible things that are happening, you know, she just sees it as the world could be, you know.
Yeah.
That's the movie's excuse for making these choices.
But I think she's like, oh, well, they said it, so I guess this is, you know, and she like forgets her reality in that moment. And they're like, oh, a loser, stupid cinders. It's for me, the mom. Get me a mode parisien. And they're like, she can't speak French. And then she's like, speaks in French. I mean, I took French for 4 semesters, don't remember what she says.
Speaking in French in brackets.
Speaks in French.
Yeah,
So
no, what she was saying was like something along the lines of like, of course I know about French fashions, and yeah, I'll take care of it. Like
yeah.
what is it? Mononofre, like I'll handle it. And and I love that moment just of the like shooting back in fluent French and having like Lady Tremaine be like,
Great.
super.
They're like, I don't, what did she say? I speak French, not Italian.
Oh yeah, the girl like at Drizella, she like walked on. I speak French, not Italian. It's like, no, that was French.
Wow.
That was French.
Definitely French.
That is a bit of the animated sass, because the animated Cinderella was a little like sassier, and this is where her kind of thing, not like, this is her moment to be like, okay, you're gonna say I'm stupid. Well, I'm gonna speak at you in French. Oh, you don't know?
Yeah, to compare them, right? So animated Cinderella, she's been through this for many years now. So she's learned the ways that she can get away with being a little sassy. But this Cinderella's version of like she's still, right in the beginning, she's still testing those waters. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
because otherwise, if this was animated Lady Tremaine, she would have thrown like a saucer at her or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, get
Because
out, wench.
animated Cinderella is scared. Like you see it in her eyes. Like there's a physical component to this
Terror.
dynamic of like, ooh, if I say the wrong thing, like
Hmm.
and there's like I'm doing this because it's a warm bed and food on the table, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
the prince is fencing with his bestie.
I love this unnecessary fencing moment. It was
Yeah.
fantastic.
He's mesmerized, he's in a daze, he's still thinking about the girl, and they're like, oh, so it's not for the people? That's what the captain says. Okay, yeah, sure, Jan. He's like, yeah, it's for the people, but I wanted to, see her. I think they're using sabers, but they're foil vibes, because when I did fencing, the saber people were always screaming and jumping around. But I think they're doing foil. Just gotta put my fencing knowledge in there.
Nice.
Though every fencing person says the only accurate sword fight is Princess Bride.
Oh,
Um,
Nice.
fun fact.
they're like, never watch Star Wars if you want to learn how to fence. They fight to hit each other's sword. Like, true. Uh, so it's just a fence. It's just they're like, what if Richard Mann would look really good fencing, right? And they're like,
Hmm.
let's do it.
Yeah.
We got an extra day.
Yeah.
He's like, God, I really didn't want to wear these tights again. But I mean, if this is super important to the development of my character, absolutely, I'll do it. Yeah, sure it is, says Kenneth Branagh. It's not because we just want to see you looking really hot.
Yeah. It's just the only way.
It's the only way to show how Kit is just so dazed by Cinderella.
It is fun to see him be all lovesick. And so she's getting ready they're getting ready. She's getting her stepsisters ready. They're being gold digging, man hating harpies. Who they just love money, and all men are stupid. They
Yeah,
don't care what
doesn't
can do them.
one of them say, oh, that's what mom says, that all men are
Yeah.
like worthless? And it's like, well, she married for love. Why would she say that?
Yeah.
Jaded.
And then also it was like, what a horrible thing to say in front of the daughter of the dad. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to just be like, oh yeah, mom always said that men are stupid, dumb idiots, and that you can take advantage of them. Like, thank you. My father was that dupe. Thank you for pointing
Yeah.
that out.
Yeah, really.
Heartless bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're talking about splitting each other's heads open on the steps. It's kind of a bonding thing for them. And they break the tiara, and then later you see at the ball like how they did it in her hair is to like hide the fact that it's split in two, which is
Yeah.
such a funny like visual detail that they don't highlight. They don't like do the like laugh track moment. It's just like there.
I did
Mhm.
not catch that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and
Yeah, they're just being awful, and she pities them because they're beautiful on the outside but ugly on the inside.
Mhm.
And because they're like, who have you talked to? Some apprentice? And she's like, yeah. And they're like, whatever. Uh, so ball. So for our check-in with Perot, we have the ball announcement. We have the Grimm thing of it's beyond class. It's not a class-bound thing, unlike Perot. Which was a scene of him opening the ball was also in the Camila Cabello Cinderella, which is again why that movie is an adaptation of this one. Um,
Yeah. At least this guy wasn't rapping.
yeah, there's no rap.
Oh God. So bad. And this guy appeared 4 times in that movie doing a rap. And I'm like, you can go now, sir. You've served your purpose. At least like in this movie, the person who's doing the announcement, he comes up in moments where it makes sense that like he would be there. He has a purpose. This
Yeah.
guy, Cadeo's Cinderella, has no purpose. Sorry.
And so she expresses the desire to go, which is something in Grimm she does, but in Perot she doesn't say anything until they've all left, and she wishes that she could go.
Yeah.
So this kind of, again, this is why I paired the Grimm one with this version, is because I think this pulls so much
Yeah.
from that version. So they're getting ready to go to the ball. Stepmom is like, you look great, 2 horses in the race. And she runs down and she's like, wait for me. Uh, and she's like, because the mice helped her, but she did it herself in this because the mice are a little less
They don't do
humanoid.
anything except for eat, which is fine.
Yeah.
That's what mice do.
That's what I say.
Yeah.
They roll fabric. They moral support.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like moral support, and then they become horses, and that's like their whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Realistic mice expectations for the mice community.
Yeah.
So she's like, oh, it's my mother's. And they're like, that's trash. It's fraying to bits, and this is where they start tearing it,
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an old-fashioned joke. And she's like, after they tear it, she's like, how could you? And they're like, you're a ragged servant girl, and that's what you should always be. Like, we can't be seen associated with you. Uh, and she runs off. Now, I would say this is kind of a downgrade from the animation.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Generally, I would say I think I like this one more than the animated. It's hard to say, but this is like the animated scene is so visceral
Yeah.
and terrifying.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think to do it in live action might be almost too visceral and terrifying to see like a human girl getting her clothes torn off of her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that is like the most brutal scene, I feel like, in the animated version, is just watching them like rip pearls off of her neck and like tear like the sash, and like, yeah, it just would be a little too violent for a child audience in a live action, because it's like,
Yeah.
no, those are human beings doing it to another human. It's not like a cartoon anvil falling on somebody's head, or
Yeah.
like, the mice having all these like shenanigans in animation, but it's like, no, that's a human being that you're watching get like attacked.
Mhm.
Yeah. It'd be triggering.
Yeah.
Again, we said the word isn't as meaningful, but like I think it would be triggering in a very real original sense of the word.
Yeah.
Uh so she runs out crying. She kind of does she's like, I tried to have courage, but I can't. Which is I wish they had done a little bit more with her trying to live up to courage and kindness and being like, I tried, but like I tried to be brave through all this, but like this sucks. And she's crying, and there's an old woman who's like, oh, why are you crying? And she's like, oh, it's nothing. She's like, oh, can I have milk?
So what was interesting to me was, like, I felt like her costume design as the old woman was that she looked like a tree or like a
Yeah.
branch,
Mhm.
which I wish that they had done more, like, grim nod
Yeah.
to the branch, showing like the branch that was brought from her dad being somehow like laid on a grave, put in the yard in some way, like there was
Yes.
some kind of that. And then that lady had popped up where she had buried it, looking
Yeah.
like that gnarled branch, because like her
Love
costume
that.
design was like all or, like the hood was like brown, and like she was kind of like melted down into
Mhm.
like the undergrowth when she popped out. And so I kind of was like, is she supposed to look like a tree because she is the fairy godmother that comes from the tree, but they had not established that? It's
Yeah.
fine.
It's fine.
Yeah, no, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And because I thought I was like, oh, I thought she was like a gargoyle part of like the building. And then like she had sort of emerged from it. But yeah, I can see like she kind of looks like she's part of the branches,
Yeah, like a
or at least like the
gnarled,
roots or something.
yeah, it's like she looked like gnarled wood just
Yeah.
like sitting there. And I was like, they had to have styled that on purpose that way. But I'm like, I feel like they needed to take it one more step of explanation
Yeah, I
further,
agree.
or else it was just like, oh, that's a choice for
Yeah,
what you're
look it. We can make Helena Bonham Carter look ugly.
yeah.
It's like, cool.
Good work,
Good.
guys.
But yeah, she's like an unhoused person, I guess, to be correct. Ask like a wandering person asking for food, which
Yeah.
was a thing, and it still is a
Yeah.
thing. And she gives her milk, and she's like, "Oh, I'm crying over nothing." And she's like, "Oh, what's nothing? Milk is nothing, but with kindness, it's everything." And she's like, she said she's like, oh, who are you? She's like, I'm your fairy godmother. And she's like, those don't exist. And she's like, your mother believed in them, and don't say no because I heard her. And she's like, what?
You've been
Uh
spying on us this whole time.
You've been watching all this happen and you haven't done anything about it.
oh, we reamed into the animated one for
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like you could have
But
Yeah.
if
stepped
this
in.
one has physically been present on the grounds, either as a gargoyle, that's my theory, or as some sort of tree or undergrowth, as Katrina's theory,
Yeah.
I mean, but I
Yeah.
guess if she was stuck as a gargoyle or a tree and she
Yeah.
couldn't quite magic herself out of it yet.
Or it's like if she needed like the tears falling on her to activate her
Activate.
magic powers.
Yeah. Or like you said,
Yeah.
the branch, the symbol of the love between her and her parents to activate it. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm like, if it was from the branch, then she wouldn't have overheard the fairy godmother thing because she would
True.
have
Right.
been. So I'm like, so no, it remains a
It
mystery.
remains a
Yes.
mystery. And this is kind of shout out to the kind and unkind girls uh fairy tale type, which is often described as a Cinderella type. But it's usually like two girls and they each are given some kind of supernatural test, and whoever passes is rewarded, and fail, it's a pass fail, and if you
Yeah.
fail,
Love
you're
those kind of
punished.
classes.
Yeah. So there's like Perot has the fairies slash diamonds and toads,
Yeah.
or there's Frau Holly with the Brothers Grimm. And I think it is smart to kind of use that to explain how she has a connection with this fairy godmother. And the fairy godmother's here. It's whimsical transformation time. She warps herself into like a little like sparkly LED lit fairy, and she's turning lizards into footmen, and she has a vision goofing around with the pumpkin.
Yeah, because
She's like,
she's like, do you have
Yeah.
a watermelon? No. Cantaloupe? I don't even know what that is. She says, we grow pumpkins. She goes, I've never worked with a pumpkin before. Let's go.
For me, I don't know why this scene was the most irritating for me. I was not enjoying this fairy godmother just
Really?
because I don't know, like the way that she was like portrayed as this kind of like uh extremely bumbling, but at the same time very competent. But also, I don't know, like there was just something like about the energy that
Mhm.
was just, it felt like this kind of like displaced chaos. But then at
Mm,
the same time, when kind of like the glass of because I was like, why did you do this indoors? You
inside.
knew how big it was going to be. But then when the glass kind of was part of the carriage, I was like, okay, maybe I see why we had this. Oh no, we're trapped, we're stuck. Oh, but now it's part of it. It's fine. And I don't know. I wasn't enjoying the fairy godmother character.
Yeah. I don't think I liked her the first time. I think this time around, I was like, oh, this is fun. And I like Helena Bonham Carter.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, it is a little displaced because I feel like everything else is really grounded. But then when she shows up, things kind of have some chaos. But maybe that's
I
just
think
the magic.
I think that's
Yeah.
the nature of the fairy godmother just in Cinderella as a story, is that
Yeah.
everything else is like realistic, in air quotes, but like it's not like Snow White where like every step of the way things are weird or magical. Sleeping Beauty, you could say that. Whereas like Cinderella is like a normal domestic thing, but one person has magic.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what changes it. So I think it does kind of feel like in any version, like even the animated version, it's like, oh, she's here, she's doing magic, and there's been no magic other than talking animals, which isn't magical to them, so
Yeah.
Mhm.
it is definitely a tonal shift.
Yeah.
Yeah,
um
especially with like the smushing up against the glass. I didn't care for that because I
yeah.
think that gag is a little, overused. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is there she turns the mice into horses. She still says bippity boppity boo, but she doesn't sing it.
Yeah.
She turns Mr. Goose into the coachman. He's like, I'm just a goose, I can't drive.
Loved that. I love that he admitted it. And it looks like he learned on the job. Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, my dress. And she's like, can you repair it? It's my mother's old dress. And she's like, could I change everything
Okay.
about it?
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this. Okay.
No.
This is the dress she ends up with. The dress
Yeah.
that she started with was pink, frilly up top, fluffy little sleeves. It was like T length. And it was not a ball gown, it was
No.
just like A line.
It was
Okay.
Yeah.
not ball appropriate. It does look like
It was
something
pink.
Camilla would have designed.
Yes, and
That like kind of formless.
that queen would have eaten it up for some reason. That queen with very few taste. But anyway, so then she's like, okay, but don't change it because it was my mom's dress. Instantly changes it. Can I make it blue? Sure. Changes it. Transformation. We can talk about how pretty that is, whatever. But she ends up in this dress. It looks nothing like it.
No.
No.
There's, I mean, perhaps maybe
Similar
this
fluff around the
maybe this is
top.
the fabric here. She just dyed it blue and that's the only thing left from the dress. And she's like, oh yeah, my mother would have loved it. And it's like, yeah, she would have loved it, but she would have been like, that's not the dress I made.
Yeah, that's not my dress. That's not the, and I'm like either needed to like cut that line, or the original dress should have been like a blue color.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the same thing, but maybe with like a pattern, some type of like
Butterfly
motif on it.
thing.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if it had like a butterfly like motif or something on it, and then the fairy godmother had just made it more butterflies, like so many butterflies you couldn't believe, or like just to where it was her mother's, but it was her mother's enhanced. This was, oh, technically we know that you were wearing your mother's dress underneath what I just put over top of it with magic.
Yeah, I
And
kind of feel like if it had the same like sort of silhouette, except for being poofy, if it was still the A line,
Yeah.
still sort of tapered and still had like that shape on the top, even if it was a different color, I would have been like, sure, this is the same dress but enhanced. Like it
yeah,
just, it's weird. Yeah, I agree. That's
yeah. So
uh,
it was like either cut the line or make it make sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe just
Like
cut the line.
you
That's
did
Yeah.
this to
simpler.
yourself kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's butterflies, there's a lot of magical twirling, which
And
is
it
hard
goes on
because
for a long time.
they really revel in it. And I think the animated scene is so iconic, and none of the live actions have topped the dress thing. I think they were trying, and it's cool. I mean, I'm like, why does she keep twirling? But it's seeing all the lights and the poofing and the color. The dress
Yeah.
was color corrected.
Different poses.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you see it set footage on set, it's more silvery, and
Yeah.
this is very like blue.
Yeah.
Uh,
That makes sense. Um,
I will say
yeah,
it's an S tier dress. I think it looks great.
Yeah.
it is gorgeous. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. I just because I love the animated one where it's sort of like the sparkles coming down. That's so pretty and
Yeah.
iconic,
Yeah,
and I don't know. I guess the transformation's fine, but
Yeah. It was just a
uh
little long, and you know what they're trying to live up to, and you're like, it's
sometimes
such,
less is more.
yeah, and it's like it's such an iconic scene for like for so long. Like, and
yeah,
so it's like,
Mhm.
don't reference it, but don't try to top it. Or like
Yeah.
don't even try to equal it. Do a classic like spin and do some glitter falling down so that the nod to it is there, but
yeah,
it just went on for a while.
Yeah.
yeah. And so they go off to leave, and she's like, "Oh, your shoes," and she's like, "Oh, no one's gonna see them," and she's like, "Oh, I'm really good at shoes," and she makes glass slippers, which were on set. They were made of crystal, but she never actually wore them because a human foot can't fit into that. But they have these shoes, and she's like, magic ends at midnight. Your family won't recognize you, but spell will be broken. And she's like, more than
Okay.
enough time.
So I think I complained to the Camila Cabello one that it was a cop out that the Billy Porter fairy godmother was like, okay, fine, yeah, we'll make sure that like your family can't recognize you. I think my problem is because in this, I was fine with it because she did a thing where there was sparkles over her face. It's like, okay, she
Yeah.
has a disguise to them. I saw the magic. In the Camilo Cabello, he didn't do anything. He was like, okay, it's wrapped up in the spell too. Get on your way. It's
Well,
like,
it's also because she's like this unidentified person. I need him to recognize me in that one. I think
yeah, so
that's
like there
I
was
think like
more logic leaps
if it's for
there.
these I need these three specific people to not recognize me. Done. I need
And
no one to
then,
recognize me except one vague person.
yes, it was like, yeah, it was like multiple logic leaps with that. So, but also I think it's like, it was just like, okay, sure, that's wrapped up in the spell too. But there was no like indication that he made that happen. In this, there
Yeah.
was like an indication. I was like, okay, I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention I did like the bit of like that Helena Bonham Carter's like fairy godmother, because she had this kind of like chaotic energy about her. I did like that it was a like that she's like, oh, shoes. And then she was like, it's like as she's leaving, she's like, oh, and obviously it'd be bad if somebody were to recognize. And
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
like because they had the chaotic fairy godmother, which I did not appreciate. But because that was like the energy that she had, like it allowed for that kind of like it, instead of it being an offhanded remark, what it came off
Yeah.
as was this like fairy godmother is like, oh, and this would be helpful, oh, and this will be helpful.
Yeah, it's just she's suddenly remembering all the things. Like she doesn't have a
Yeah,
written to-do list. It's all up
Yeah.
here, and you
yeah,
shouldn't do that. You should probably write things down.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know. Hannah's much better at that than me. I must
I
be I need
manage
to
the Asana board.
yes.
But because they made that creative choice, I felt like
Yeah.
it really worked instead of it sounding just like an offhanded like,
Yeah.
oh, and also this is like part of it because people are going to complain about like, why didn't they notice? And so
Yeah.
so this is a thing that we're just throwing into the movie because like,
Yeah.
no, because of that choice it made sense that this lady was like, oh, and
Yeah. She keeps almost forgetting. She's like, oh yes, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's let's time our next Perot check-in. We have okay, she can't go, she's forbidden. They explain the fairy godparent and they connect it with something she has done. Even if it's not super planted long term. Prince is waiting for her specifically. Again, something they did in the Camilla one. And this one does capture a bit of the sort of creativity of the Perot transformations, where it's like, oh, let's find this and make this out of that, you know.
Mhm.
So we're finally at this ball.
Let's go to the ball.
Let's go to the ball today. There's fireworks, they're announcing people. All the countries that they're referencing are actually like various old-timey micro states or like old-timey terms for different countries, which is a fun little attention to detail.
I didn't know that.
But there's Princess Jelena of Zaragoza is the one who they're like, she's got to wed the prince. And she's like, oh, your small kingdom's really charming. And he's like, I hope it's not too confining, my small
Yeah.
kingdom.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought her line was a little there was like a slight condescension, but it was also nice. So I was like, I don't know.
She was
Yeah.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that line that they were like playing with was exactly right for that character, where it was like she wasn't supposed to be mean. I don't think that she was supposed to be
Right.
mean, but she definitely did think that her country was better, or know that her country was better. Because I mean,
Uh-huh.
that was kind of like the trouble that the king was having, was he was like, I know that our country could be more if we did more of the like played politics more with marriages and stuff.
Mhm.
But it was also, so it was that thing where it's like she didn't mean to be mean, but that was a really like tactless thing to say.
Yeah.
And so him taking it as like, that was a really tactless thing to say, so I'm gonna say something that gently points out, yeah, what you just said was kind of tactless, without calling her out. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well played.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's her character's cool in that they didn't fully make her like, oh, she sucks, you know, because like when Cinderella
Yeah.
comes in, she's like, oh, who's she? She's like intrigued, you know. I think
Yeah.
because we already have enough female villains in this movie, like we don't need
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
Uh so the lizards, because the Step family enters, they're being fools. But the lizards give Cinderella a pep talk because she's like, I'm not a princess. And the
Okay,
lizard is like, I'm just a lizard.
I'm a lizard,
Enjoy it.
20 minutes ago, I was just a lizard. Now I am a lizard person. Um, so at first I was like, oh, that's really weird. Like they kind of look like still like lizards, and like he still kind of looks like a goose. And then I was like, you know what? I guess I'm fine with that. Like it's still like a little bit of like the whimsical magic.
Yeah.
And I think it also
Yeah.
points a little bit to that Helena Bonham Carter was a little underprepared, maybe a little unpracticed. And so that spell didn't go all the way through, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's like she meant as good as she could, like
Yeah,
like she meant well.
Yeah.
What was that
exactly.
line that Cinderella said? It was like they do their best, or like
They
they
treat me as
treat
well
us
as they're able.
She did as
and-
well as she was able.
yeah, it's like I felt that with that fairy godmother too. Because I'm like, it was weird because like my particular thing with the lizard was I was like, your teeth make me really uncomfortable, and so I need to not see your green sharp teeth because it's a little creepy for me.
And his
But
eyes.
yeah, but I absolutely loved the line of the like, yeah, you're not a princess. I used to be a lizard. Like, listen, we all just kind of have to rise to the occasion sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's
yeah,
the confidence I need to go into things with, more of just like, you know what? I'm a lizard, and but fake it till you make it. Like,
fake it till you
Yeah.
make it. Yeah, and she comes in, she has her big entrance. They're playing the Lavender's Blue song that her mother sings, and she's milking it because she walks in and she's late, so everyone looks at her and she's like, it's my time. She's like,
yes,
I got the
Yeah.
spotlight, and she's like slowly like bowing, and she's like, yeah, this dress kills. So she's working it. And it is like a very like the movie feels kind of like technicolor in this, like with all the dresses, and like it's just such a pop. And he is like, excuse me, and it's immediately like straight at her. And she's like, oh, everyone's looking at you. He's like, oh, they're looking at you.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
I
she's
think
like,
that was her being polite again, because again, like you said, she knew she looked good.
yeah.
Her entrance to me came off very much like she was acting how she thought people were supposed to act when they got to a ball, like in this very like naive way of like, oh, and do I bow here, and everyone's looking, so here also I will like
Yeah.
curtsy down, like, is this, and so it's like almost as if like everybody at first was looking at her because they were like, you're not acting
Normal.
right.
Yeah.
But then also as they're looking at her, they're like, oh, but like, go on. You should be acting like this because maybe you look like you're better than the rest of us. So maybe you are better than the rest of us. Maybe you're acting different because you come from a place where people are so much more well-mannered than us that we don't know that this is what well-mannered.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's just they're like, okay, do your thing. She's like, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, and then like the prince like recognizing her immediately and being like, oh, yes, 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 yes.
Uh-huh.
Instead of like in like the animated version where it's just like he like spots her and is like, that's hot.
Yeah. And so he's like, oh, would you do me the honor of having the first? He's all tongue-tied, and she's like, dance? They're just very cute together. They do their big waltz. She knows the choreo because that's not simple choreo.
Yeah.
Either she's just go with the flow. She's just having courage and be kinding it, rising to the occasion, as the lizard
Having
says.
courage and be kinding it. I love that that's the verb.
And so they do this dance. Now, I always say this is the horniest Cinderella.
Which
Like
is
this,
crazy. I can't believe this is it. Because I was like, is it the Camila Cabello one? And
but
then I'm like,
like
I don't think
they're
so.
like he touches her back, and she's like, Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're into each other. Also, maybe because one time I was at like a leather bar and it was like they were playing like very graphic porn on one TV and this movie on the other, which was like such a
Because those
contrast.
are equal. No, they're equal. There's no contrast. They're equal.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you're like, this is the horniest Cinderella.
it really
That is
is.
so funny.
Yeah. And so he, he sneaks her away after their big dance, and everyone's like in awe, like, oh my gosh, like look at them. And they have great chemistry. He sneaks her away, and he's like, "Ah, I didn't realize you were like a princess, like no more secrets, right?" And she's like, yeah. Uh,
She's like, oh yeah, and you're a prince, not just an
yeah.
apprentice. He's like, no, I
Yeah.
am still learning my trade from my
Yeah.
father. And
No, and I loved his humility in that moment when she was like, "You're the prince." And he's like, "I'm a prince." And
yes.
I was like, "Oh, that is lovely." Like we love like because I feel like when we're watching like a movie and somebody is like a prince and you are like, oh, they're going to be stuck up, out of touch, like whatever,
Yeah.
up themselves. And so you need to see those little moments of like that humility. And I loved that they had like included that little distinction of his of like, I'm a prince.
Yeah, there's
Like,
Yeah.
don't get it twisted. I don't think I'm way better than you.
yeah, and that he's like, yeah, there's like other princes all over the world. I'm just one of many.
Yeah.
Um, and he is still like, I am an apprentice. I still consider myself that. Um, yeah, he is very humble, and I think that like his father also comes across as someone, even though like uh he's a little bit more rough around the
Mhm.
edges, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh,
Traditional in how he
yeah,
Traditional.
views a role of a king.
but he is sort of still like he's not like I am the king. He's still like, these are the things we got to do as royals kind of person. So,
As yeah, because I'm like the king seemed very much like he thought of his subjects as what was important about his role. That he's
yeah.
Yeah.
like the like punctuality is like a manner of princes or like the
Yeah.
what he had said about that. That he was trying to teach his son that like you owe it to the people of our kingdom to rule well,
Hmm.
that our job isn't to like sit here on our thrones and be fancy. It's to take care of these people in their lives.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was like, and he felt like the way to do that was to keep following traditional patterns of only marrying princesses and like just those type of things. But then hearing his son be like, I also care about the people, and that's why this is important.
Hmm.
I thought that was really nicely nuanced, like their relationship with each other.
Yeah.
Truly a 0 to 60 if you go from animated to this, like a bottom tier to top tier kind of
Yeah.
jump. We have an angry alcoholic, probably man, and like his disinterested gay son to like this like very like kind, thoughtful king and his very like humble, generous son. Yeah, who's into her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he also talks about like, oh, my portrait. Oh, I hate myself in portraits. He's like, oh, that's you. He's like, oh, I hate it. He's
Yeah.
like,
It's like, don't you? And she's like, oh, I've never had my portrait done
and he's like,
before.
oh, well, they should. And he says it's like,
Yeah.
because you're hot.
Yeah. You're right. This is the horniest Cinderella.
It is.
I
They're just
see it now.
they're really into each other. So meanwhile, the stepmom is overhearing the Grand Duke talk about, oh, well, I already promised him to Princess Zelina of Zaragoza. I need to find who she is. And she's like, oh, your secret's safe with me. Uh, Biggest lie.
Yeah.
And but they're, Cinderella and the prince are in the gardens and they're talking about, like their families and what they value. And um he takes her to the secret garden. And he puts her on this swing, and we get the moment where he's like, oh, you wear like these glass shoes.
Okay. I did not like the swing thing. It felt weirdly like infantilizing that like she was like a little kid and
Yeah.
he was pushing her. I didn't like that. But I did like the fact like there was like the secret garden and it was like a special place that he had never shown anyone before, and that was nice. But the swing, that's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
Swing, draw the line there. And he's like, "What's your name?" And she's about to tell him, and then we get the clock strikes 12, and she's like, "I have to go. I had a lovely time. You're, one of the kindest people I've ever met. Like, it was so great to spend time with. Like, I gotta go." And I like that he doesn't grab her.
He's just like, okay, and he just lets her go.
Yeah, he's not
Yeah.
like
And he
forcibly
has a
holding her
he
hand.
has a couple
Yeah.
moments before he decides to go after her. He like sits on
Yeah.
the swing and he's like, pumpkins and gooses. And he's like,
Yeah.
oh wait, I should go after her. So like
Yeah.
she gets a head start and he doesn't immediately be like, I have to go after her. I gotta grab her.
Yeah.
I gotta get her. He doesn't do that, which is
Yeah.
good.
We've seen a lot of grabby princes on this
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, you guys have like been through it. You're like,
Yeah.
I like that he didn't
We've seen
grab her. Manhandler. I was like, but it made me think because I was like, oh yeah, no, that's right. Like normally there's like no, like I possess you, you're gonna be here, I'm gonna manhandle you and like make sure that you know that, and they have to like fight. It's like
Yeah.
that's not romantic.
No,
No.
no. And so she runs through the ballroom. It's like the stepsisters grab him and he's like, and she runs into the king. She bumps into him and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." She's like, "Oh, but your son, he's the kindest person I've ever met. And I hope he loves you very much." Because they had talked about, him wanting to live up to his father. And so she's running, he's sprinting, and she leaves her slipper as she's running down. It falls off and she has time to grab it. Like the Grand Duke was on the animated one's tail, but she looks up and she sees he's like at the top of the stairs. But I think she's like, "I'm leaving it." I think she does a bit of an into the woods thing where she's like, "You can have it."
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And we get the little comic antic chase as they run through the town and it turns into a pumpkin and everything's falling apart.
Yeah,
Less
they
scary.
almost go
Yeah,
off of a cliff though.
they do.
The
Yes.
goose really going like fast and furious with that
Yeah.
carriage. But yeah, and so like as like it's turning into a pumpkin again, you can see the inside turning into the gourd and it's closing. And I was like, "Ooh, I don't like that. That's scary."
Yeah. No, I was like, that made the glass house scene like it balance it. I'm like, yeah, okay, there's kind of a symmetry. There's kind of like a balance here. So maybe if I watch the movie again, I'll appreciate like the antics there because it was like while it got big and they were like smashed in the thing, then when it got
Yeah.
small, she was like, oh no. I was like,
Yeah.
there has to be a better way, a better situation to do this because this seems like a tough magical spell to do. It gets
Yeah.
you one way or another. It seems
Yeah,
Yeah.
either
exactly.
smashing you on the outside, smashing you back in.
Yeah.
That's okay. The fairy godmother did the best that she knew how.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She's not a graduate of Hogwarts.
I
That
was just
kind of
gonna
thing.
say, Bellatrix went to Hogwarts. This fairy godmother, I don't even know if she went to Beauxbatons.
Yeah. I think she dropped out and did her own thing.
Yeah,
And
she's like, I'm gonna go make shoes.
yeah.
I do shoes really well.
Yep.
So that she gets back, with her mice friends and stuff, and she sees her stepsisters, and we get the moment from the Perot where she's like kind of like, "Oh, what was going on? Oh, a mystery princess." And the stepmother's like, but she's like, "Oh, he's betrothed. It was all a charade." And because the stepsisters are like, "You should have seen him dance with me." She's like, "Ah, he barely danced with you." Uh, so this is kind of if our check-in, the ball, very romantic. We have the midnight flight. Like most adaptations, it's only one night. But we do get the Perot gloating kind of thing that was cut in most versions. And you have the king as kind of a barrier, which they do in the Camilla version, but in this, shortly after this check, we get the king is gonna finally die of Victorian novel disease.
Yes.
And he's like, marry for love. Like, if you believe that if I ordered you, would you do it? And he's like, no.
Oh my God. You know what I just realized? Speaking of the Camila Cabello, because as you said that
Yeah.
millions of images are popping in my mind from that movie. This is 2 movies back to back featuring fencing
Yeah.
because the
Minnie Driver.
Queen Minnie Driver was fencing in that
Light of my
movie
life. Yeah.
right when she was about to have, this heated marital debate with her husband, the king, Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, but can we get back to Cinderella?
Can we get back to the
So,
plot? Can we wrap this up? Because that movie's longer than this one.
and yes,
Jeez.
yet it has less content.
Yeah.
Isn't that
So
weird?
so
Yeah.
he is like, if he's like, I think we can find strength in our own borders. Like we don't need to look outside. And the king is like, marry for love, marry the forgetful one that everyone's talking about. And he passes away, and you get the prince like gets on the bed with him and like
Like
cuddles
in
up.
fetal position. Yeah, it's really sad.
I actually
Yeah.
cried in this, and I was like, dang, like
Yeah.
this movie
Yeah.
is sad at times.
Yeah. No, and I love that they like gave the kingdom time for mourning. Like after that, like
Yes.
the timeline cools off
Yeah.
in the story because they're like he took time to like mourn, and I love that they put that like in the movie because it is like, yeah, of course he's not like, boom, dad is dead. Next day, he's like, now let's find this lady. He's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, I am turned off right now because I'm just sad, and that's
Yeah.
okay to just be sad for a while and not be
Yeah.
like, oh, let me go hunt down somebody.
It's also interesting that like her parents and his dad and mother are dead. That like
Yeah.
no one can have like no good parents can live in this
No.
universe.
Victorian novel disease is coming for them.
Yeah.
So the he sure like months after he announces that he'll marry the girl who has the glass slipper.
Mhm.
And the stepmom though, like she hears that in the market. Cinderella leaves her stepsisters there, gets on her horse, like runs,
Yeah.
and so
Because
she
she had
comes
hidden
the slipper
the
in the
shoe
attic,
in the attic. Yeah.
and she wrote in her journal about it.
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
journaled.
which that was I think that was like the first and only time that
Yes.
she pulled out the journal to use it, which I was like, very dangerous to be writing something down in a movie where people are mean to you.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't do that. If you're ever in a movie, don't write down your deepest thoughts that
Yeah.
could be used against you later in your life,
Uh-huh.
and leave them in your home. That's
Yeah. If
my
you
Yeah.
ever find yourself in a movie,
Yes.
don't do
Yeah.
Yeah.
that.
There's
Dangerous.
that actually connects to one of the cut scenes, which I think that adds something to like how this all shakes out at the end, is that in the cut scenes, which are cut, so they're not part of the movie, you can't judge it on it, but it's like she's writing a letter to him and being like, I'm Cinderella. I want to see you again. I think you're like me too. She delivers it to the palace.
Do you
And
like me?
do
Yes
you
or
like me?
no?
She's like, meet me in the glade where we met at this time. But the Duke gets it and burns it because he finds it's a
Um,
servant girl. Because she said,
Mm,
like, I'm Cinderella, and so she's waiting for the prince and he doesn't
mm,
show. And
interesting.
so that makes her behavior towards the end make a little more sense to me. If she like gave him the opportunity to step up for her.
yeah.
Uh,
Which behavior of hers?
her just being zonked out towards the end.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like,
Yeah, because she wasn't locked up in the attic like in the animated one.
She was.
she
Oh,
was for maybe
oh,
multiple
okay.
days.
Yeah, we
Oh,
don't know
okay.
how long.
This girl
But
is so malnourished.
yeah, no, she did. She had her depression era for sure.
Yeah. Uh, so the stepmom gets a slipper first, which I love. This is such a good
She's sitting in
scene.
shadows.
Yeah, holding
Classic.
it. She's got like a this going on. It's fading into the background. Also, my background, it makes it look like I'm like jealous of Lily James and like covering
No,
her up.
you wanted both of them to kiss you.
Yeah.
Mwah. So she's like, well, once upon a time, there was this girl who married for love. She had two beautiful daughters, but he died. And then she married again. But this time he died, and she had to look every day on his beloved child. And she had hope, but then some girl in glass slippers stole the prince, and it appears I live unhappily ever after. So, how'd you get this shoe? Did you steal it? And she's like, oh, it was a given. She's like, no, everything you must pay. I'm like, relatable with inflation
Yeah.
these days. Uh, but she's like, kindness is free, love is free, which is a very sweet sentiment. Though I do feel like sacrifice is in many ways integral to
Yeah.
love. But
Yeah.
it's also, I like it. It's like, I have a critique, but I also resonate with it. Uh, but she's like, you know what? I don't even care how you got it, but no one will believe you. I'll present you. You can then marry the prince, which is a scene that they did with Adina in the Camilla version, where she's like,
Yeah.
you'll marry the prince, and then I manage the kingdom.
But that one's a little different where like Idina discovers it and she was like, oh my God. She's like excited about the
Yeah,
prospect. This is not excitement. This is
no,
like, fine, here's what
fine.
we're going to do. And you're going to give me something in return. You're going to make me head of the household and I'm going to rule that prince, who is
Yeah,
actually the king.
actually the king. She's like,
So,
that boy. And she's like, this is where I'm like, girl, just lie, and say sure
Yeah.
until the end. But she's like,
Yeah.
she's
she
like,
doesn't know what a lie
she
is.
doesn't
Yeah.
know.
She
She's
just
too good.
Too pure.
To be fair. And she's like, no. Which this is where I feel like she's holding some resentment inside, and she's like, now it's time. I'm done. I'm done.
yeah.
She's like, I wasn't able to protect my father from you, but I'll protect the prince and this kingdom.
Mhm.
And she's like, well, that's a mistake. And she shatters the slipper. And she's
Yeah.
like, no. And she's like, why are you so cruel to me? I've tried to be kind to you.
Yeah.
And she's like, you kind to me? She's like, yeah. And no one deserves to be treated this way. And she's like, why? And she's like, this line, like I could think about this line that the stepmother says, where she's like, because you are
Yeah.
young and innocent and good, and it's like, is it, she's like, because I'm
Yeah.
not? Is it because it's like, because I'm jealous, or it's because I see you as someone who's weak, who I can take advantage of?
Yeah.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
To me, that line hurt because of how relatable I feel like it is to me now in my life. Because, like, and that's interesting what you're saying of like fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Because for me, what it felt like was her being like, because like you are young, you still have faith in the world, you still have faith that things will work out and that everything will be fine, like you are still safe in like your naivete, and I can't be naive anymore. I don't have the option
Oh,
anymore to like be that anymore. Like my world, I'm so cynical at this point in my life that I can't stand watching you having faith in the world,
Mm.
because because I can't have faith in the world anymore, and I want to be cruel to you to destroy that illusion
Yep.
for you, so you stop living in this naive happy place, because you living in a naive
damn.
happy place hurts me. Like that's how I
Mhm.
felt, and I was like, so it hurt me because like hearing that those words come out of like that woman's like mouth, because it made me think about like, where have I lost like my naivete? Where is my like irritation with some of the sickly sweet in this movie coming
Mm.
from my baggage, my own personal problem? And how much better would it be if I let myself be more Cinderella, like be more Ella?
Yeah. That's interesting.
I'm like that line, it hurt me. And
Emotional
Yeah.
damage.
I'll bring it up in therapy.
Therapy. There you go.
It's okay. We're all processing how horrible life can be sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, so I was reading it as like she wants to destroy that part of her. And like, she does sort of have this face where she's um sort of like possibly jealousy, and that's why she wants to crush it, because she wants to bring everyone down to her level. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really powerful, that
Yeah.
whole scene. And then yeah, she locks her in there, shuts
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
door and locks her in.
Because it is like, how dare you be so happy and positive in a world that is clearly miserable. And I'm making your world miserable and you're still refusing
Yeah.
to be miserable. Like, how dare you?
Yeah.
And it's like,
It's
or maybe like you need to help yourself. Like,
yeah. It's just the characters are so well acted. I think it's like that
yeah,
allows like this scene, which is really just a confrontation between our hero and our villain, and to like
yeah,
it's just a conversation, and to have it feel so palpable and kind of like
yeah,
the center of our movie of like these two philosophies.
yeah,
And yeah,
And
she's
this is like such a successful version of this. The Camila Cabello tried to do this where it was like, oh yeah, like she's past her prime and so she
yeah.
wants to, bring Cinderella down a couple pegs. And it's like that's not like I'm not necessarily as empathetic or sympathetic for her. I don't get the same feelings that I do in this one. Like
I
it's
I think because I mean their philosophies are or essentially
yeah,
opposing philosophies about the role of women in business in the home in
yeah.
that one, and this was composing philosophies about or opposing philosophies about like life and like what the
Yes.
world is like. And so you can kind of understand both perspectives, even if you know one person is wrong. You're
yeah,
like, but I mean, I get it, like
Hmm.
you've been through
yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think this goes back to like what you had talked about like earlier on about other live actions and like other TV shows trying to show the the reasons behind why villains are the way that they are, why they like do the things. And this one was so successful in the way that it is like it paints that worldview. It shows like why she thinks the way that she does and absolutely in no way tries to make excuses for her. It's
yeah,
you are like, I see where your worldview is skewed or is like cynical, but
yeah,
also no excuse
Yeah.
at
yeah.
all for your cruelty for this behavior. It's like no.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
she's glamorous and broken, so you can connect with her that way, but it doesn't excuse. She's not aspirational. She's not like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't follow the rules. It's like, no, she's a child abuser. She's like
Yeah.
a
Hmm.
sad, bitter person.
Yeah.
But I
Hmm.
mean, it's Kate Blanchett, so she's still compelling, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's well done. And so Tremaine goes straight to the Duke and is like, I have the servant girl, embarrassing, scandalous. But he's like, oh, well, I'm glad no one has to know. She's like, it'd be great to keep it that way. And he's like, are you threatening me? And she's like, yes.
Yes. And then she laughs.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I love you, Kate
Yeah.
Blanchett.
And then he's like, all right, what do you want? She's like, I get to be a countess and I get two good marriages for my daughters. He's like, done. And she's like, great. He's like, what about her? She's like, I don't care. She means
Do
nothing
with
to
her what
me.
you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even then, it's like she blinks in a way where she's still kind of, when she says, oh, she means nothing to me, it's like, but like she doesn't. It is still kind of like, oh, but she's still family. Like you see that there's like a humanity to her, where
Mhm.
she's like, but to say, oh, she's nothing is like still hard for her. Or
Yeah.
like, yeah. So well done. But so the Grand Duke and the Prince come to this deal. If you find her, spare no effort, and if you can't find her, I'll marry Jelena. But if not,
Mhm.
like let's find her. And so they're all lining up to try on the shoe. And I was like, I feel like these women, these like some of these girls are like, do you want to like just get froyo and then try on the slipper? Like it's just like a day
Yeah.
out, It's like
Yeah.
they know it's not theirs, but they're
Yeah.
like, let's go,
Yeah.
want to go see
They're
the
like,
palace and try on this shoe.
well, also I think like if you think about this in like a realistic sense, it's like, okay, that shoe fits one person. But the way shoes are made, they fit lots of people. So we'll
Yeah.
get Froyo, and who knows, maybe one of us will become the queen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like and we have to do it anyway because they're forcing every like woman to try this on.
Yeah,
So it
it's
has
an
to be done
obligation.
anyway. Yeah. So it's like if we have to do it anyway, like let's make a day of it. Let's have fun, whatever. It's fine. I know that it's not me. Possibly, maybe it'll fit, but
Yeah. Like imagine being
either
the
way, fun
other
story.
girl who has the same exact size and shape of foot as Cinderella, and you just got there first and just like it
yeah.
fit. And it was just like, holy shit. And he looks
Yeah,
up and he's like, okay, I mean, you have red hair, but I guess you're the same person because it fits. And it's like, yeah, that was
Yeah.
totally
that's
me.
how shoes work.
That's
Yeah.
they explain that it's magic, so it only fits her. And so,
Yeah.
but we get the fun kind of like yeast foot. I'm like, wow, I'm
Oh,
attacked because my feet smell terrible. But where they're
but then
like
it made
everyone
me think
passes
about the
out.
bakers of the world. I was like, oh my God, is that really happening to them? That sucks.
Yeah. And yeah, they're just trying on the shoe. It's cute, but it does make me wonder how long she's in this tower. Like,
True.
are they sliding food under the door? Is she just starving?
Or the mice smuggling little peas
Oh,
and
that's
stuff for
cute.
her. I bet you that's what they're doing.
Yeah. So they show up, the stepsisters are trying to fit, classic gag. But the birds, who haven't really been characters, but
No, they
they
come and
warn,
tap on the window.
yeah. I wonder if it's like, how crows, where like if you're
Yes.
nice, crows like communicate with other crows and
Lyle
you.
Lyle wants to befriend a crow so that he
Uh,
can like have them bring him things and stuff
yeah.
Yes,
and that he can be a friend of the crows. Yes.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Um,
I feel like she was nice to the mice, and the mice are friends with the birds, and they're like,
yeah.
she's good, and so like all the animals know, like you can trust her.
Or maybe the stag was like, "Hey, she
Yeah.
saved me from being murdered." And the
Funny.
bird's like,
Yeah.
"That's wicked."
She's a real
Um,
one.
yeah,
Well,
she's a real one.
Because I'm like, for me, because like the birds being hinted at the beginning of like just
Oh.
right at the beginning, and my brain had gone grim. When the birds popped up at the end, I was like, oh, yeah, we're getting the birds reintroduced to peck out some eyes at the end of this. I was like, is it about to turn? And
It
I don't know
didn't.
why. Like the whole time, I was just like, yeah, like get them. And
Yeah.
I just was rooting for a bird attack. I don't know
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
wrong with me.
It was needed. I wonder too, you could argue if the birds, because they always appear in the sky, they appear at the beginning and at the end. It's like, are they manifestations of the fairy godmother in a way?
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't know.
maybe.
Watch
Yeah.
your
Prepare.
eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also we it's sort of mentioned that like so she's like sitting by the window. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't
No.
know that they've come up. So like
Yeah.
the animated Cinderella knows
Yeah,
this.
this is a very
Yeah.
different climax because animated Cinderella is a lot more active in like, get Bruno, like she's fighting. She's like, get me
Yeah.
out of here. And
She's fighting for her life.
yeah.
And this
Yeah.
one is like she's depressed. She doesn't even know what's happening.
Yeah,
And so the animals really have to act on their own behalf.
that's why I was questioning. I was like, was she locked in there? Because like, yeah, it was like in the animated one, she's very much like we have to sort out how to get like this is my
Yeah.
chance. Like we have to get out. And this one, she's very much just like, well,
Mm.
I'm locked up here now. So
She's
oh,
like,
well.
it'll all be golden memories, like my childhood and the ball, which makes sense if she went to go meet the prince and he didn't meet
Show up.
her. And she's like, well, at least
Yeah.
I have that time,
that memory of
and I'll sing and that'll keep me company as I'm starving to death in this tower.
So
But if she knows he's looking for her,
yeah, so that wouldn't so I wonder what so maybe she goes home after the announcement and she's like,
yeah,
okay, I'm gonna write this letter to him, sends it, she goes and does that, and then he doesn't come to her, and that's why she's depressed. Because I was like, that's the only way that cadence would make sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she's
We could have cut the painter and had that.
we
Like,
could have, yeah. I think they were trying to keep it short, which I do appreciate.
I so
Uh,
appreciate. But
yeah.
I have to say,
This could have been longer, actually. This movie, there was enough
Yeah.
But
going on that I was
in
invested.
an hour 45, sorry, an hour 39 is really just the movie itself.
Yeah.
They fit so much that I actually thought this movie was way longer than that because they fit so much in that time
Yeah.
that there is a lot of richness there.
Yeah. It's
So
well
that's
made.
really
Yeah.
impressive.
The mice open the window. Even greedy Gus Gus drops his cheese. So you can open the window and they hear her singing and they're like, you sure there's not another girl here? She's like, no. And the captain's like, has your cat learned to sing?
Just sing.
And
Love
she's
that.
like,
Which I'm like, I love the captain.
Yeah.
Perfect man.
Yeah. And then when
the
does
prince,
the reveal
the
happen? Is it
king
this?
shows up because the Grand Duke is like, I believe her, let's go. And the king rips off the uniform. It's like, oh, I want to hear the music. So it's a way to have both the Perot, the footmen are searching, and the Grimm, like the prince is there himself. And he's like, Captain, will you investigate? So they go up to the tower, and she's like, oh, it's just a servant girl. Uh,
Okay,
and
so first of all, she has to unlock the door, and no one's
yeah,
like, "I'm sorry, you have her locked up here? What the fuck?"
Yeah,
I
like
mean,
even if this is a servant girl, why do you have her locked up here? She can't
yeah,
serve you. She can't be
If
cleaning
she's
your laundry if she's locked up here. This
true.
doesn't make logical sense.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, he definitely is like something's not right because she's like, "Oh, I forbid you," and he's like, "Who are you to forbid an officer of the king, a saint, an empress, a deity, the three things higher than a king, I guess."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, I'm her mother," and she's like, "You're not my mother, and you
You have
never have
never been.
been."
Yep.
So this is where she's like she's mad at her finally.
Yeah.
And she goes down, and this is like this is the scariest thing is to be seen as you are, without
Mhm.
magic. And we get another have courage and be kind, and she's like, he's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Cinderella. So it's like she's kind of taking this slur and reclaiming it, like this is who I am, like I've been through
Yeah.
this and come out the other side. I don't have castles or a carriage, but I'm an honest country girl who loves you. I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy.
Oh boy. Yep.
And he's
I
like,
thought of that too.
do you take me as an apprentice learning his trade, like. And they try on the shoe, they almost kiss. This is their second almost kiss, but the stepsisters apologize. They're like, "Oh, our dear sister, we're sorry." And the Grand Duke is there, and she waltzes past her haters. She's got the slipper, she's holding it, they're walking past, and she's a
They're holding
stepmother. They're holding
hands.
hands, second base.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the stepmother's watching from above, and she's like, "I forgive you."
And
So this to me, okay, there's a lot of it. So to me, I like the idea that they're forgiven, but like they go in a soft exile, I guess, where they leave.
right.
But it's like
Yeah.
she's forgiving. She's like, I'm not gonna hold on to this for me. Like, but
Sure.
like we're not hanging out.
Yeah.
Like
I'm never gonna see you again.
like
Yeah.
bye.
I'm not making sure that your daughters get good husbands. I'm not making sure that like you're happy in this house any longer.
Yeah.
Like I I forgive you so that I can get past you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I remember when this movie came out, someone's like, see, forgiveness is bad because that forgiveness won't fix her stepmother's financial troubles. And I was like, she's her abuser. She doesn't
Yeah.
owe her
Yeah. I
anything.
was like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, are we supposed to be hopeful that her financial troubles are going to be? Because I mean, like, yeah, I feel bad because she's a woman in that society. That sucks. But also she was abusing this girl who she was
Yeah.
supposed
Yeah.
to take care of in love. And yeah,
And
I'm sorry,
If
you don't
maybe
deserve.
yeah, I'm like maybe if the stepmother starts having courage and being kind, her life will turn around. If she had courage and been kind like throughout the whole movie, then I'm sure that like Ella would have pulled her up with
yeah.
her. But
Cinderella would have in this version been her own girl boss in a way. And if her stepmother was supportive of her, would be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do to like make money and take care of the house. She would
yeah.
have like sold
Yeah.
candlesticks and essential oils or whatever, like she would have found a
Yeah.
way to help take care of the
Yeah.
whole family. But like because she was shunted aside, it's like, you know what? Whatever. But she does leave the house, which I'm like, didn't you stay for the house?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was something that I also wanted closure on was I actually thought, oh, that's gonna be like their vacation home or something.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I just have to say that every time we say, have courage and be kind, it's just giving me live, laugh, love energy.
Yeah.
It is designed to be like I saw live laugh
Yeah.
love-esque signs and stuff in
Yeah.
college when this movie came out. People would have that on the wall.
Uh,
We just have one that says courage.
love that.
That was my word though. Okay.
It was your word.
Yeah. So it's time for the wedding. She says like, "Oh, we need your portrait painted." And she's like, "Oh, I do hate myself in portraits." So they have their little repertoire, whatever. I can't speak French despite my impeccable French accent and 4 semesters. But so
Yeah,
the
impeccable. You went Borat.
yeah, the animals are there. I love that they continue with that. She brings them. And she's true to herself, sees the world as it could be, which is kind of a good quality in a monarch in a way that she could revitalize some institutions. And they say believe in courage, kindness, and a little bit of magic.
Yeah.
So I guess our check-in is we have the prince there with the search. It's pretty closer almost than the Disney version to the Perot with like she has to be summoned. She's not trying to get there. And they have the forgiveness ending, but sort of in a way
Yeah.
that's more palatable to a modern audience.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about these characters, so I don't know if we need to talk about them that
Yeah.
much more, but our protagonist, I think she's a different Cinderella than the animated one.
Yeah.
I think they're different characters, and there's things I like about each one and dislike. But I think her biggest point is that she sits out her climax.
Yeah. I mean, I wish they had at least kept that scene in to make that make sense.
Yeah,
But I also think the other thing is that like it was like, oh yeah, she didn't even know that they had rolled up. It's like, well, how do we know that? She's
yeah,
literally looking out the window. We don't know what direction she's looking.
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's like, I don't know.
yeah. Just
Yeah, it was weird.
it does lessen the stakes because
Yeah.
that animated Cinderella feels everything so deeply and it
Yeah.
gets so visceral and like what's happening at the end, even though it's like
Yeah.
it's Cinderella, you know how it ends, But yeah, I would still say I root for her as a protagonist. And I do, she's
Yeah.
a character I find very aspirational and I really root for and admire. But well, I'm interested in everyone else's thoughts, or at least we talked about like the toxic positivity aspect.
They were trying to make this, feel like, still a role model for like girls, and that's why there was such that heavy emphasis on the message, like have courage and be kind, because they were like, oh well, we want like, all children, but it's, I'm like, they're gearing it towards like girls,
Mhm.
and they're
Yeah,
like, no, we want girls not just to be like, be kind and beautiful, be kind and good at housework. They were like, oh, kind and courage, like we want
yeah,
those like two things. And that's how they're trying to make her this role model, and I didn't see it as a role model, just because that kindness was so toxic and poisonous to her, that she had internalized this message. And I'm like, this happens to people a lot too, like where somebody that you love gives you like some good advice when you're young, but then you over apply it
Mm.
yeah,
to everything, to the point where you're not feeling out all the nuances of it. And I felt like at the end, when she was like, you were never a mother to me," like that was her kind of moment of realizing, like, I can't be blanketly nice to everybody. I can't just give everybody
Mhm.
benefit of the doubt. I can't. But it was like that turning point happened to so close to the end of the movie, and then she just immediately followed it up with like, I forgive you,
Yeah.
that I'm like, it unfortunately makes it so that the message almost for kids is like, oh well, if you're just overly kind to everybody and let people step on you and take advantage of you, eventually it'll all work out great for you. And
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, unfortunately,
No,
no.
that is
The
a
world
message
is,
I
yeah, I'm like, the world is,
internalized as a kid. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the world is
Yeah.
full of abusers.
Yeah, I think it's like they had that in the confrontation between them, they had a chance for her to be like, well, the kind now it's not kindness time, it's courage time. To be like, I've tried to be kind to you and it just doesn't work. And she's like, oh, you're just bad, and like and then I know it could be cheesy if she like climbs down the tower wall or like we don't want it. They're trying not to make it a cheap up upgrade, but I think there is
Yeah.
something that they could have done to kind of be like, okay, well, this is a turning point where I
It
realize,
could have been as simple as she sees the King's Guard approach and she's
yeah,
like, this is my chance. It could have been as simple as that. And then, she tries to find a way out of the tower. Like,
yeah,
or she chooses to be like, no, I'm going to let them do their thing. Like, it
yeah,
could have literally been that's her choice.
But at the same time, I do find myself like rooting for her, because it is like that part of me that is like, I also want to believe that the world is good and that most people have good intentions and that things like will work out like eventually. I do want to have
Hmm.
that belief. And so I do find myself like rooting for her, because I want to root for the world that she thinks
Yeah.
exists. Like
yeah,
I do want the world to be a wonderful, kind place. And I think that she wants to make it a kind place. Cause like she's not a person that just wants everybody to be kind to her. She's a person that wants to bring kindness into the world. And I think all people should want to do that.
Yeah.
So I root for her and the world that she wishes it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the charm of the movie too, is that it's like, yeah, maybe this isn't a hundo P realistic, but like I admire this, her like hope, and it's like I want to make a world where that could be real.
Yeah.
And I guess our prince, I would say he's probably our best prince yet on the podcast. We
Mhm.
know I love Prince Philip and Sleeping Beauty, but he'd be a little handsy.
Yeah.
So I think Richard Madden takes the cake.
I
Uh,
I also think that like this movie has a good balance between Cinderella, so it should be very heavy Cinderella, but we also do get the world of the prince as well, in
yeah,
enough that we can understand him, empathize with him, and understand his worldview, and how those worldviews actually connect him with Cinderella. Whereas
Yeah.
like the Camila Cabello was it was
way off balance.
it was mostly the prince and his family, and there's a little bit of Cinderella. So yeah,
Yeah.
I liked the balance here of the
Yeah.
movie. I thought his relationship with his father was really interesting because, like we said, like usually the king is that sort of antagonistic force in his life, but it's actually this other person. He's sort of a slight antagonist where he's like, no, you should do it this way, but
Yeah.
he gives in really easy because, life is really short.
Mhm.
He's about to die. He loves his son, and he knows that he's not like always right.
Yeah. It's rare to see
So
a father, a good dad that's not an idiot in
yeah.
a movie that we've watched. I don't know. Like
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like his dad realized that since he was dying, he realized like it's important. I think that line was so important that Ella said to him at the ball of like, "I hope you know how much your son loves you,"
Hmm.
because I think that line made the dad realize that like before he dies, he wants his son to know that he loves him and trusts him to be the next king, that
Yes.
yeah.
he like realized like, oh, I don't want to die and have my son left wondering if I ever had faith in him or if I thought that he could do
Yeah.
it. Like I'm just gonna like I need to before I die let him know like I believe that you're gonna be a good king and that you have like a good direction that you're headed, even
Yeah.
if we disagree on like the hows of that. It doesn't make I don't I as your dad don't think that you're gonna bomb this just because
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
think differently. And yeah, I think they did such a good job of making the prince a very three-dimensional character where it wasn't just a guy being like, well, I really need to find like a woman. It was him grappling with like, okay, I'm going to be the future king. I have responsibilities. I need to make sure I'm doing this, but also I owe it to myself to be happy as well. But how do
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
balance all of these things? And I loved seeing that. And yeah, you pointing out that he didn't grab her like like it
He
would be
did
like
the
I
bare
possess you
minimum.
now. Yeah, he did the bare minimum by not grabbing her and forcing himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We love a not like
A not grabby
a
prince.
not grabby prince.
Yeah, because I think I really do ship them. And like in many other ones, I mean, I actually really like Brandy and Paolo. I think they were really sweet. And yeah, I do really ship these two. Are we in consensus there? We like them as
Yes,
a
yes,
Yeah.
pairing? Yeah.
They're both
yeah.
kind of awkward, and I
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that.
I think that they will like balance each other out. Like it in my head canon of like years in the future, because it's like he has seen more of the world. He has a kind of like a more realistic, but not totally cynical view of the world.
Yeah.
And she's like, because when she's like, no, just because something's always been done one way doesn't mean it has to be. And he's like, oh, I hadn't thought
Okay.
about that. I guess you're right. And she's like, I think people should have courage and be kind. And he was like, okay, yeah, like I agree. And I feel like they'll balance each other out with like that. It's like he's willing to listen to her idealistic views of the world. And I feel like she also is willing to like listen to like his experience of the world and still not be afraid to like to push back.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
I,
I'm like, I feel like they'll just have like a good like melding of ideas and thoughtfulness in their rule of the kingdom.
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think, yeah, of a lot of our prince and princess couples, it's like you really get Okay, yeah, I would trust. I mean, monarchy's not my ideal form, but if we're gonna have it, these two people are pretty good. And our antagonist, we've talked a lot about just how iconic Kate Blanchett is as the
Yes.
wicked stepmother.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And this movie really tells you its message a lot. So if you don't know what it is, like I don't know what to tell you. Uh, so I guess our big final question, was that your fantasy?
Yes. Because I'm like, maybe it was interesting because as I was watching the movie, I was thinking about like that question, knowing that it comes like at the end of this podcast, that it's like, is this my fantasy? And as I was watching it, I was like, yep, yeah, this is my
Yeah.
fantasy. Because which is why the Kate Blanchett line like hit so hard, where it was just like that she's like, yeah, that like, how dare you
Yeah.
be young and naive and have hope in the world.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, through the whole movie, I was like, I want this to be the world. Like, I want,
Yeah.
like, not obviously, the child abuse part of the thing,
But the
but
magic and the colors and the
yeah, the magic
animals.
and the colors, and the like, people wanting to be kind to each other, and that when you are kind, kindness flows back to you. Like when you're kind to an animal, that always kind of, there's that like flow and having hope in the world. I was like, this is my fantasy.
Yeah. I actually really liked this movie because I remember not liking it, but I did go into this being like, well, it's been a really long time, and honestly, I don't remember anything that happened. And so I also think I'm in an era where like I'm just watching movies to enjoy them rather than like always just critiquing. I have
Yeah.
actually literally been saving most of my critiques for when we actually watch on the podcast. Lisa Frankenstein's a big, big example of that. But like, yeah, I just think it was really good. So yeah, this is my
Yeah.
fantasy.
I mean, shocking no one. I'm gonna say yes, this is my fantasy. I did almost for my birthday. I did that thing where you Google Prince Charming costume, and Etsy's like, "We'll sell you a $700 replica of the Richard Madden one fit to you." And I'm like, no,
No,
I'm an adult. I have bills.
Yeah.
I'm
I have
so glad.
I have adult bills that I have to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love the message of this movie, even though it is a little simple, but like there's that kind of hope and kindness it gives, and I connect with the characters a lot. And I think it is like, to me, it is a definitive like live action Cinderella. It's probably my favorite Cinderella, especially of the ones we've watched. Like there are things I love about the animated one, there's things I love about the Brandy one. I like that a couple of the songs in Camila Cabello and Nicholas, what their version. But yeah, that's why I kind of saved it for the end of our
Mhm.
Cinderella journey, partially the end of our Cinderella journey.
Mhm.
But we'll leave you on the edge just a little bit. Katrina, before we go,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you tell people where to find the fairy tellers and what kind of stuff you talk about?
Absolutely. So you can find the Fairy Tellers anywhere where you get your podcasts. And we talk about folklore, fairy tales, and the cultures that created them, why they're created, what messages they carried, what messages they still carry. And we just have a lot of fun balancing between like academic stuff, what people have studied about the stories and the construction and the history of them, but also retelling them because some stories are ridiculous and need to be retold.
Yeah, if you like the lore portion and you're like, I wish it was just lore, the fairy tellers is the podcast for you.
Yeah. Like, we'll tell you what was going on when they did this.
Awesome. Well, definitely check them out. You can follow Not My Fantasy on Instagram and TikTok. We are at Not My Fantasy Pod. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube
And
and
smash that like button.
smash the like button on this video and every video that we have. And go ahead and leave us a comment.
Smash that.
Is this your favorite Cinderella, or do you have another Cinderella? Because
Yeah.
this is not our last time with Cinderella. We are going
Oh
to come
no.
back to her.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. There are
Guaranteed.
thousands of movies.
And
Uh, yeah.
we'll definitely be polling on Instagram which of our Cinderellas was your favorite. But our Cinderella series isn't quite over.
No, we're doing a
As
little
a
transition
transition.
from Cinderella to our next series.
Our next series. So we'll be talking about time travel, and so I'm so excited to bring an underrated gem of a movie to you, Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time.
A made for VHS sequel.
Yeah, I think it's just so fun. It's insane that it exists, and it's just so fun to talk about. And it is, to me, I think we talked about this at one of our podcasts, that sequels go, there's like, it's like Lord of the Rings 1, Lord of the Rings 2, Electric Boogaloo, Lord of the Rings 3, A Twist in Time. That is just how all
Yes.
trilogies should be numbered and
Yeah.
titled. Wild. But yeah, we're Cinderella to time travel, and that movie is our link.
Yeah. I'm excited because I know I've seen it because you were talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, no, I've definitely seen like that thing happen. I think it's one of the stepsisters finds a love interest, right?
Yep.
And I was like,
Well,
what?
we can't forget about Cinderella 2, Electric Boogaloo, which we are skipping over. We might get to someday.
Yeah.
I just have less to say. But maybe we said when the world is ending, and it's our last episode, it will be Little Mermaid 2, Return to the Sea. So maybe that'll
Yeah.
be the one before it. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're gonna predict that the world is gonna be ending. We're like, okay, well, we gotta do these two episodes back to back.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's our episode. And yeah, next week, Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time.
Iconic. All right, Katrina, thank you for joining us,
Thank you
listeners.
so much for having me.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
listeners, thanks for joining us on this pumpkin coach journey. Let me
Yes.
do my royal wave.
Royal
Bye.
waves.
Bye.
Bye.